Hello, everyone. This is Criminal Pro Pat. I can't even say my name now. This is Criminal Profiler Pat Brown. And this is a reboot because when I first started the show, for whatever reasons, the mic was completely off and nobody could hear me. So I had to just reset the whole show, and it's a big mess. So, anyway, well, it's still a big mess. Anyway, we're going to be talking about D.B. Cooper, the only unsolved hijacking in all of America's history. Who is this man? What happened to the money? Why has nobody ever solved this case? So, welcome. And this is not a well edited show, you can see, or ever edited. And you get what you get. Anyway, is everybody here? And can you actually hear me now? Please tell me you can hear me now, because what a disaster. I love it when there's issues. So, sometimes they just crop up and you don't even know what happened. So I'm just going to check in to make sure. Can you hear? Oh, thank God you can hear me now. Oh, I haven't had that happen in like last 3 years or something. I have no idea what went wrong. But anyway, so I had to send everybody away and then reboot the show. And by the way, all my photos that I had all lined up for the show, of course, disappeared. And I had to pull them all back in. They're all out of order. So have patience, because they're not in order anymore. I'm going to have to do what I can do, but I don't want to keep you waiting. So here's the show. By the way, if you want to be in the chat room with all these lovely people who actually came back, thank you very much. Please join Patreon. The link is below. If you don't want to join Patreon, you just want to watch my shows and make sure you don't miss any, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell thing. Yeah. Okay. I'm getting out of here right now and getting onto the show because people have been waiting. All right. Now, this show, the reason I actually did this show today, people have asked me about the D.B. Cooper case before, but, as a criminal profiler, I usually analyze crime scenes, murders, and this has been obviously this week has not gone well. I thought this was Mother's Day in the United States because my daughter said she was going away for the weekend for Mother's Day, their Mother's Day get together. And I'm like, oh, okay. So desert your mom, just go off with your friends, all right. I guess you'll make it up somewhere along the way. And then somebody said, but Pat, Mother's Day is not till next week. I'm like, oh, okay then. So I planned this show to not be a murder mystery, especially of a mother, because I didn't want to do that on Mother's Day. So this is not a murder mystery. And by the way, you UK folks have Mother's Day in March. Y'all screwed me up too, because I got this through this whole, I think it was Sunday. And then somebody said at the end of the day, it was like, well, happy Mother's Day, Pat. And I'm like, it was Mother's Day? And I'm like, my kids suck. I mean, I got 3 kids and not one of them wished me happy Mother's Day. And then I found out the UK has Mother's Day in March and the US has Mother's Day in May. Go figure. So here we are again. I'm just, that was, yes. Rainey, thank you very much. You're like, Ma, you're like, Pat, not Ma, you're not my daughter. Pat, it's not Mother's Day. I'm like, oh crap, So anyway, that's why I decided to do a show that didn't include murder, because I wanted to be nice, Anyway, let's get going, because this is a fascinating case. I don't know that I even would have done this case if I hadn't been like pressured into it because it was, quote, Mother's Day. But I have become very fascinated by it, and nobody solved it. And it has been in 1971, nobody solved it, including the FBI. So the question is, was this guy, this hijacker, brilliant or lucky or unlucky? And why can nobody solve it? What the heck happened to this guy? I mean, he exists. I mean, he hijacked a plane. People saw him. He jumped out of a plane with $200,000 and vanished. Is he dead? Is he alive? Nobody knows. So it is probably one of the most peculiar mystery, whatever. Pat is over her perceived trauma. I've been traumatized by 2 Mother's Day that didn't exist, and now my whole show went crap because of the audio issues. I tell you, Every day is Mother's Day. Oh, aren't you nice, Lady Jane? Yeah, let's go with that. All right, let me get to this, because they're going to be people. I love these people. They come after they see my show. They comment. It's like, the show actually starts at 10 minutes, so just skip that first part. Thanks, guys. Anyway, and by the way, it's true. You can, that little cursor thing. You just go shh, and just move it ahead if you're bored. You can do that, except for the ads. But I need the ads because that's how I survive. So stop being annoyed about the ads. I mean, if you don't want the ads, you can pay YouTube not to ever have ads. I pay that. I never see an ad on YouTube, but I pay like $18 a month for that privilege. If you don't want that, pay that $18, just suck it up. Look at your emails, something, while the ads go on, because that's how content creators like me survive, because we don't have ads. We can't even have the channel. Anyway, Pat snark. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, here we go. DB Cooper. And this is, there's a channel called Citizens Sleuth. Sorry, let me do it correctly. Citizensleuth.com. Will be linked below. This is probably the premier group of people who are or have analyzed the case, even been encouraged by the FBI to analyze the case, which is interesting, certain issues of the case. And they've been on this forever. So if you want to go and get a real, huge, all-encompassing view, this would be it. Link will be below. Citizensleuth.com. I want to give them credit because they've done a lot of work. I'm not sure it's sane, but sometimes when people get obsessed with these kind of things, they do kind of insane about it. Now, let me also point out other places you can get some information from. Let's see. We have. By the way, if you think I look like crap, I just realized I didn't hit the. I didn't hit the part of the thing that says "make me look better" when I on the video. So this is what I really look like. Sometimes I look better. Sometimes I look a lot better because it's fake, but this is real me. I am 69 years old. This is the real me, but I do like it when I put the fake thing on and it might clear up my skin like this. But anyway, all right, let's get to what I want to point about, which is there's a great, pretty good on Max, which is HBO, The Mystery of DB Cooper. This is a documentary, which I highly recommend. I enjoyed it. And I'm very critical about a lot of documentaries because, first of all, they often have an agenda, they're highly biased, or they're boring. And this one was actually really good. I enjoyed it. There is another one, which I did not bother to watch because it was a series and it got really bad reviews. And that was on Netflix, DB Cooper, Where Are You? I just didn't have the energy. So I didn't watch that. Oh, sorry. Everything's out of order. I'll get to that in a minute. So those are the two main documentaries. If you want to watch something about it, you can go on YouTube and there's a massive amount of documentaries or YouTube shows on this case because everybody's fascinated with it because it's never been solved. So you can find that. You can also find some books. I hear there's a book by a fellow named Edwards. His last name is Edwards. I think it's like not available on Kindle, so it's like $70 or something if you want to get it. I didn't feel a need to spend that kind of money, but there are a couple other books out there. Here's one fellow. Let's see, who are the fellows? Here's one fellow, Jeffrey Gray. He wrote Skyjack: The Hunt for DB Cooper. He got like into all the records and everything. It's a very huge book, I guess. It didn't get a lot of rave reviews, so I don't know if this guy, just he was obsessing about it and just had way too much information. But I'll point it out. And there's this fella, Bruce Smith. People tend to like his book a little bit better, author of DB Cooper and the FBI. Hey, he's an unusual character. He lives in this house. Kind of an obsessive and curious character. I'd like to have beer with him. I would. I think he sounds like he'd be fun. But I did not read his book either. So I stuck with pretty much the HBO documentary and the FBI files and other information from Citizen Sleuths to gather up enough of what I needed to do with the show. And what I want to do with this show is, obviously, if nobody solved the case, Pat Brown, much as I'm a brilliant criminal profiler, probably not going to solve this case either. I'm not looking at the people and go, oh my God, it's that guy. I can't say that. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure any of the suspects that there have been out there are even the right people. I mean, there's been a ridiculous amount, like this, an insane amount of suspects. And then there's been the favorite suspects. Apparently there's been the FBI or others have narrowed it down to about 20 people, but I don't think those 20 people match either. And so I'm going to take you along on a profiling journey. I'm going to have you profile along with me and have you also say, what do you see when I say, hey, here's an issue? What do you actually see? What do you see as the problem with this? And what do you think we should be looking at? Now, I'm basing things on evidence as opposed to, hey, this looks like a cool guy. Let me see if I can make him into DB Cooper. I want to look at the evidence and say, what does the evidence tell us about who DB Cooper is and who he is not? So I think this is very important. And so we're going to go on this little profiling journey together. All right now. Okay, so Sarah's in the mood today. I mean, so do we get paid for miles? Yeah, okay. And one of the reasons I avoided this case, by the way, is because I'm a mechanical idiot. And so I don't understand how things work as far as cars, planes, that kind of stuff. So, I can't get into the intricacies of how the flight path would work and all that stuff. All I know is when I get in a plane, well, before I get in a plane, I go to the bar and I have a double Bloody Mary so when we're taking off, I go, please go up, please go up, please go up. And then when we're landing, I seem to like that better because you see all the cute little houses. And I love to look out the window, and I always get the window. And then I can look out and see all the land and the housing. And it's so cool that I can distract myself as we come in for a landing. And so far I've landed, which is always a good thing. So anyway, I want to read first from Citizen Sleuths. They labeled this DB Cooper, everything you need to know in 5 minutes. That'll work for this show because I want you to understand the just generalities of it because there's so much information I don't want to overload. All right. So brief summary in 20 sentences. I like it. One afternoon, a day before Thanksgiving in 1971. I also want you to keep in mind it's 1971. This is very important for as far as evidence goes. Like, tell me right away, folks, in the chat room, what would be not available in 1971? Because this is extremely important. What would not be available in 1971? Oh my God. Sarah, you're on a roll. Fashion. Okay, that is true. Since I was in the last year of my high school, you're entirely correct. No video and no DNA. DNA is the most important thing of all. No DNA. This is bad and good, in the sense that it's bad because at the time there was no DNA testing. However, if they retained evidence, there could be there's obviously DNA testing now. So a lot of cold cases are solved today simply by DNA testing. And it's kind of funny because a lot of times people think, oh my God, there was so much brilliant work done. I'm like, no, there wasn't. They just took a case from 40 years ago, pulled out a piece of cloth, DNA tested it, and came up with the guy. No, I don't object to that. But it wasn't from brilliant detective work. It was simply that science caught up. And now we have some way to test whatever we have left over in a box someplace. And sadly, a lot of times what it means is some serial killer that went on and killed 20 women, and he didn't get caught till he was 78, or dead. And to me, that's not exactly a cool thing. It's just, at least it's something. Oh, look, I just realized I can touch up my appearance. Sorry, I just realized I can do this right now. Hey, do I look better? See how that works? I'm going to do this till I'm 100. Anyway, so DNA was not available then. So the most important thing to understand is that he DB Cooper in this hijacking wasn't concerned about leaving his DNA because it didn't exist. So keep that in mind. That's really important. That was a different thing at the time. I'm just laughing at some of these comments. I don't remember 1971, but I remember 1974. It was the same. Are you talking about bad fashion? Tracking cell phones. There were no cell phones then. That is another issue. What was available then? I want to ask you this question. What evidence was probably the most important thing that was available at the time? They had witness statements. What scientific evidence would there have been available in 1971? I wasn't born. Oh my God, there was. Oh, seriously. Oh, sorry. Wait a minute. Hold on. Fingerprints. Thank you, Lynn. Fingerprints were available. And keep this in mind. It's very important when we're going to do our little profiling thingy. Paper. There were paper records, but blood type. Think so, yeah. But not DNA. No security on planes. This is very true. He walked. You didn't have to have even an ID. Oh my God, those were the wonderful days, in my opinion. You didn't have to go through security. He walked onto the plane with a briefcase that theoretically had a bomb in it. No security, gave a name. It didn't have to show an ID. He gave a name. He said, "My name is Dan Cooper." Actually, when you see DB Cooper, it's because it was reported incorrectly. And he said Dan Cooper, but they reported as DB Cooper. So ever since, he's been DB Cooper. But yeah, there was zero security. Nobody had an issue with it for the most part. And come right down to it, I wish we'd go back to those days, because for all the crap that we do, it just makes our lives miserable. But keep in mind the fingerprint issue. Okay, they have magnifying glasses. Well, we still have those. Okay, let me read the rest of this. One afternoon, a day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a guy who called himself Dan Cooper, the media mistakenly called him DB Cooper, boarded a Northwest Airlines. This is also very important. Northwest Airlines Flight number 305, bound for Seattle. He was wearing a dark suit, a black tie, and was described as a business executive type. And this is the reason he apparently wore this was because he wanted to not be questioned as, "You look weird, dude." It didn't look strange. He wanted to be respected when he boarded the plane. I'll get into the FBI profile a little later, which is actually one I actually tend to agree with, which is unusual for me. But he boarded in a suit, so he'd look like a business person, carrying a briefcase, so he would not be suspected of, or he'd flag the person. Back then, I mean, maybe they were lax, but if you look really freaking weird, they might pull you over and wonder what's going on with you. So he wanted to look respectable. So he was wearing a dark suit and a black tie and was described as a business executive type. While in the air, he opened his briefcase, showing a bomb to the flight attendant, and hijacked the plane. All right, let me go to my pictures, which are completely out of order. But I want to show you, there was I got to find it now. As I said, I always point out, my pictures are really little I use StreamYard, and all the pictures are in a row and they're very tiny. And I had them all in order so I could find them, but now they're not in order, so I can't find them so well. But I want to show you the picture of, it was on the show. It was in the documentary. And now it's missing. Oh, for God's sakes. That's not it. But he did come on with it. But this is an important point. He came on with a briefcase. Okay. I'm going to get to the briefcase issue in a minute. But he sat down with that briefcase and he showed the flight attendant. He said, "Look, I got a bomb." And he opened it up. Now, this is really important to me. He said he opened a briefcase showing a bomb to the flight attendant, and it was wires and a bunch of some red sticks. One of the questions is, was he showing a real bomb? And I think the answer is absolutely not. I don't think he had bomb skills, bomb making skills. And I don't believe he showed it to her very long. I think he went like this This is important because if he didn't have a real bomb, first of all, he wasn't intending to hurt anyone. And one of the things I find in his character is that he doesn't seem to want to harm people, which is interesting because some people don't give a crap who they hurt in the commission of crime. He seemed to actually not want to hurt anybody. I don't believe he had a real bomb in the case. And one of the more important things to me is if he had a fake bomb, which they're describing as just being, which she describes as a bunch of wires and some red sticks. Now, let me show you some pictures of, if I can find them, pictures of here they are. This is the crew. This is who ended up on the plane when he jumped out of the plane. There was a pilot, the co-pilot. I forgot who the third dude was. And then she was Tina Mucklow. She was a stewardess, and she really very brave woman. And he had her sit down next to him. And he said, "Look, this is what I got here." And she was the one who had to bring notes to the captain and all that stuff. And she was like in the middle of it. And so she saw the bomb. I mean, she's a young woman. What does she know bombs? I mean, I don't know anything about bombs. Somebody showed me a case with a bunch of, looked like dynamite and some wires. I'd be worried. That's all he really wanted to do, is make them worried. I don't believe it was a real bomb. So when I look back at this case, I just want to say, if it wasn't a real bomb, then it's highly likely that it was a thin layer of some whatever red sticks he had and some wires. And underneath that, he had room to put other things. And I think one of the things they say about this guy is when he jumped out of the plane, he's wearing a suit and some shoes that weren't suitable for landing on the ground and then hiking through any area. First of all, I think the shoes, she looked down, saw some shoes that were not loafers. They were up to over his ankles. So I don't know what she saw. She could have actually seen some hiking boots that were, just not so obvious. Some kind of shoe that was solid enough for him to land on and walk away with and walk around in. But also he was only wearing a suit. It was kind of cold when he jumped out of the plane. And depending on where he landed, he might have to walk for quite a long time. Would he freeze to death, get hypothermia? Or did he have some kind of long johns underneath his clothing? Did he have extra clothing in that briefcase underneath the bomb that could have, gloves, hat, all that kind of stuff that could have assisted him in surviving a longer time? I don't see much written about that, that the briefcase may have held more useful items than anybody really wants to talk about. So that's a suitcase thing. So anyway, he had that, showed her this bomb, and then he hijacked the plane. When the plane landed in Seattle, where he demanded $200,000 in cash, which was over $1 million in those days, but would be $1 million today. So $200,000 wasn't a small amount; it was huge. He asked for 4 parachutes, and the reason he asked for 4 parachutes was he wanted to be sure he got some parachutes that were working, and he wanted to make them think he might be taking hostages, like somebody was going to go with him. How the double, you jump and you have 2 people, because he wanted to make sure they didn't just give him 4 bad parachutes or give him a bad parachute and they just jumps out. It's like, that happens. Wow, dang it. He wanted to make sure that they wouldn't screw him. So he made it look like he was going to take hostages, and therefore they better give him some decent parachutes. And so he also asked for food for the crew, which is interesting. Again, he doesn't seem to be a mean fellow or uncaring. He actually wanted to make sure everybody was okay. And he released all the passengers. Once he got the $200,000 and the parachutes and the food, he let everybody go, except he kept the people he needed, which is the pilots, obviously. With only 3 pilots and 1 flight attendant left on board, they took off from Seattle with the marked bills. Now, they did mark the bills, and I don't know how much time they had to do all this crap, but they supposedly had marked bills, and there is some proof the fact that they were marked. What did he think about whether he's going to get marked bills or not? Generally speaking, you would have some clue that the bills might be marked in some way, or photographs so that they knew what the numbers of the bills were, whatever. So that if you ever used those bills, they would be identified as being from the hijacking, and therefore they could identify where you were, where you're spending the money and all that stuff. In the long run, only one small portion of those bills, it's a little over $5,000, showed up, were the bills from the hijacking, and the rest of the $200,000 has never shown up anyplace. I'll get into why the 5,000, a little bit over 5,000, showed up. So anyway, they take off from Seattle, and now he's basically saying, we're going to fly to Mexico City. It's kind of just a southern path. Not that he had any intention of going to Mexico City. And it was dark and lightly raining. In the 45 minutes after takeoff, Cooper sent the flight attendant to the cockpit while donning the parachute, tied the bank bag full of $20 bills to himself. Apparently, they kind of slightly screwed him on that. They tried to, first of all, he should have asked for bigger bills, but, generally speaking, $20 bills are easier to offload than $100 bills, right? So he got these $20 bills, and what they were hoping is that it was a lot of stuff, so they'd fall out, and but he got those bills, and they put them in a sack that wasn't too well put together. So I'm trying to find the picture of, there we go. So it was the canvas bag that contained one of the parachutes was given to him, and then he asked for parachutes. He only used two, but one was a piece of crap. He used the cord from one of the remaining parachutes to tie the stolen money bag shut, because he didn't want to lose the money, which this is some of the money that was eventually found. But so he had the parachute, then he tied up the money to himself, and he took the briefcase, which is interesting to me. I'll stop here and ask you, why do you think he took the briefcase? I mean, you're jumping out of a freaking plane. You got your money. Why do you take the briefcase? Somebody tell me. Did they have serial numbers for the full $200,000 or just some of it? The claim is all of it, but what do we know? Fingerprints on the briefcase? No, that's not it. Money? No, there's no money in the briefcase. So it can't be traced. No, there's no money in the fingerprint. Okay. I want to point out the finger. Okay. Food or gun for hunting inside. I like that better, Caitlin. I like that better. I want to point this out as far as the evidence goes. Okay, let's look at something that happened on the plane. So he's on the plane. He asked for bourbon. He spilled some of the bourbon, didn't drink much of it. He had a lot of time to drink more and more bourbon. They said he wasn't an alcoholic or like had a big, because he didn't drink much, but he did drink this glass of bourbon, some of the bourbon. He had his hands on that glass. He also, by the way, smoked cigarettes, and so he's smoking cigarettes all the time he was there. But look at this. What do you notice about his fingers? Tell me about his fingers. False ID inside? Probably not. Blankets? Maybe. I don't know if that in 1971 it had one of those really cool blankets you could put on, one of those keeps you warm in the freezing cold. I would go with Carla here. Survival kit items, as if he was landing in the wild. Most likely manicured as a face. That's from the video. I have no idea if he has manicured hands. Medication. That could be weapons, possibly. Yeah. The fingerprints is not, see, this is the whole thing about the fingerprints. Don't drink alcohol while committing crimes. This is excellent, Christoph. Actually, it's true. If you drink too much, you may screw it up. So he did not do that. He was cautious he asked for a bourbon, but he only drank a little bit. And then he did smoke cigarettes. And whether he smoked cigarettes because he was anxious and he always smoked anyway. So they looked at the cigarettes as possibly being something he normally did. And here's something I want to point out as we go along. Nobody ever commits a crime differently from the way they live in normal life. This is something that is rarely talked about. But you don't act differently during a crime than you do in life. In other words, we are who we are. If you take serial killers, if they're the type that jump out of the bush and just like attack you and like beat you with a rock and stab you, they're not all that, careful in real life either. If you get a guy who kidnaps a woman, takes her to a basement, ties her to a wall, and keeps her alive for 3 months in his dungeon, that guy is patient, meticulous. There's different, you just don't commit crimes you're not a different person when you commit the crime. So he had his own personality when he committed this crime. Flash, okay, flash, okay. Oh, that's good. Maps and a compass, very much likely. I like that. Matches, lighter, absolutely. Clothes, yeah, things to keep warm with. Yeah, I think that there's no good reason why he would jump out and take the stupid briefcase. If it was just a fake bomb, just leave it on the freaking airplane. Why would you weight yourself down with that for no reason? They never found the briefcase, by the way. Keep in mind, they never found the parachute, the briefcase, a body. They did find a little bit of the money, and I'll get to that because that is the most complex, confusing thing of this whole. Oh, maps, maybe, possible. So, but what do we have? What is one of the issues about the? Go back. Let me go back to this picture because this is going to be a big issue. This is the biggest issue for me of all the suspects. Let me go back to my picture. Where did I go? Where did I go to? As I said, everything's out of order now. Hello, where's my picture? I love it when things go out of order. Oh, it's so much more difficult because you can't find anything. Here we go. Look at the picture. What strikes you about this picture? Guy's hijacking a plane, asking for $200,000 in cash. He doesn't want to be caught. What is odd about this picture? No, he doesn't need to put the money in it. The money's already in the other bag. Thank you, Beth. No gloves, no wedding ring. Well, that again, he's. I don't know if that's anything to do with anything. This is a picture basically from the documentary. No gloves is the issue. No gloves. Okay. He's leaving fingerprints. Yes, every frickin' where. He's holding a glass. He's touching this. Fingerprints are freaking everywhere. What does that tell you about our suspect? No, we're not in the days later. They're not decades later here. We don't, again, I have no idea if his nails were nice or manicured. That's all from the documentary. That's a fake. That's an actor's hand. Oh, I love it, Carla. Suggests he does not have a criminal record if he's not worried about leaving prints. Thank you. That's what struck me. One other thing. What else is he not worried about? Yeah, he never did crime. He's not a student of criminal profiling. Thanks, Dee. Apparently not. Maybe he's an idiot, but he's not an idiot. This guy is very smart. This is an interesting point. He does not have a criminal record, or he may not have expected to survive. As Allison says, maybe this is all just a big thrill thing for him. He was just going to do this thing to see if he'd get away with it. And he knew if when he jumped, he wasn't going to survive anyway, probably. So he really didn't give a crap about his fingerprints. That is possible and not unreasonable to consider. Okay, so we're going to keep that out on the chart, whatever chart I have here. One, he never committed a crime previously, so his fingerprints are not in the system. Two, he didn't think he was going to survive. One more thing. One more. Probably not. I think that's exact. I think he could just make another fake bomb. He was about 40 years old, by the way. I'll get into rest stop. I want you to come up with a third one. Never committed a crime, so he wasn't in the system. Two, maybe he didn't think he was going to survive, so he didn't give a crap. Three, where else might they have fingerprints? Does anybody think about where he might have fingerprints otherwise? No, he'd have to. He know. No, this guy. He said he doesn't. He didn't know about fingerprints. This guy's not stupid. Okay, he planned a very meticulous crime. I'll get into more of them. Ow, bingo, Martina. The army. No, that's correct. No military record. Yep, there you go. You're all rolled in on that. Yes, finally, that's what I'm looking for. No military record. I checked how they had this weird thing where up until about 1975, where I found it because it was weird. Now I lost it. Somewhere around 1974, they stopped actually fingerprinting people going into the military. That's what it says, and I'm like, what the? But before that, they did. So if he was in the military, he'd know his fingerprints will be on record in the U.S. military. And if you're going to commit a crime like this, and you think your fingerprints are out there, why would you commit a crime like this? Leave fingerprints on glasses everywhere around you, unless A, you know your fingerprints cannot be identified, or B, you weren't planning to survive. Those are the only two that make any sense. So keep that in mind. No wife and family. Maybe. Good question. Let's go on a little bit more of the story. All right. So now Cooper sent the flight attendant to the cockpit, donned the parachute, tied the bank bag full of $20 bills to himself, lowered the rear stairs. Lowered the rear stairs. The stair, the stairs when you come out, the ones you have to walk up into the plane and come back out of the plane, especially back then. Way more of those than today. He knew how to lower the stairs. Apparently, even people who flew these commercial airlines and everybody who worked did not know this stuff. That they did not know you could lower those stairs during the flight. They only thought you could do that when you're on the ground. He knew you could lower them during the flight. He knew how to do it. That is very unique. So this guy is not just anybody. This guy has a familiarity. He had a familiarity with the Boeing planes. He had a familiarity with flight paths. He actually knew the areas that he was flying over. So he wasn't just some dummy who just jumped onto the plane and said, "Hey, I got a bomb." He knew how to get off the dang plane in mid-flight. Yeah. Way more than me. I wouldn't have a clue. I don't even know how to hardly put my seat back, much less jump off a freaking plane. Not just an enthusiast. This is details that he shouldn't know unless he worked in the airline industry. Carla, former Boeing worker in Seattle. Okay. He said this interesting thing. The flight attendant asked him if he had a grudge against Northwest Airlines. He said, "No, I don't." But he indicated he had a grudge, and he did have a grudge, but not against them. Who was the grudge against that he was talking about? I have strongly considered that he worked for Boeing because he was on a Boeing airplane. He knew how it worked, and it just seems too coincidental. And he knew the Northwest area very, very well, Seattle area, Portland. He knew that whole area. So that map area, that he had something to do with Boeing, is very possible. Very, very possible. Could be a bitter airline worker, but not just an airline worker. He actually knew the mechanics of the plane, which is unique. All right, so then after he did all this, he lowered the rear stairs, and somewhere north of Portland, Oregon, he jumped into the night. When the plane landed with the stairs down, they found the two remaining parachutes. So he just took two, and on the seat Cooper was sitting in was the black tie he was wearing, and this became a real interesting piece of information. The black tie looked like this, and it had this little tie clip on it. There was a DNA. They didn't get anything from the DNA, but they did find out that there was some unique chemicals that were on the tie. And it said here, this is from Citizens Sleuth's website. Titanium metal was rare and exotic, narrowing down the field of possible D.B. Cooper suspects. The titanium particles on the tie was the most dramatic finding in this research. Most other metals would have written off as contamination or too common to be of any use. But this additional finding that the titanium was not alloyed allowed further restrictions on where Cooper could have acquired these unusual flecks. So these little things on his tie. Cooper worked or had access to a plant that used titanium, and this fact alone reduces the number of potential suspects from millions down to hundreds. A tie would have been worn by managers or engineers in metalworking plants. So one of those theories is that maybe it had something to do with the construction of airplanes. Because where would he get the tie from? If the stuff on his tie, he could have gone down to Salvation Army and bought a tie, but the chances that it would have that metal on it is would be quite unusual. The tie came from pennies. Now there was somebody who said this, and I thought this was so silly. That, mind you, he seemed a little what I would call dapper. He had a nice suit on, he had a tie on, he had his little glasses on. I mean, he was he spoke well. Miss, take a look at my bum. Miss, you need to do this. He was polite. He had his bourbon and his cigarettes, and he had his tie, and, a little bit dapper. But his tie came from pennies. And somebody said, one of the things said that his suit coat wasn't like a perfect match to his pants. I'm going to say this: if he were, first of all, he had money and he had a nice Brooks Brothers, really good. I don't know, Brooks Brothers, is that a good suit company? I don't remember. Anyway, Italian suit in his closet. I'll go with Italian suit. Let's say he's got a really stunning Italian suit in his closet. First of all, he doesn't need to overdress to play the part of just a businessman. Secondly, if you're going to jump out of the freaking airplane and destroy your clothes in the process and wherever you land, you don't need to wear your best suit. What you need to do is wear something that is suitable. So the fact that the tie came from pennies does not necessarily mean he could only afford pennies. It could just mean he just used something that was useful. Now, the fact that there was these little metal things on his tie that were from pennies will put him in a work situation where he wore that tie. Again, if you're in a work situation, you're not going to wear your Italian suit. If you were in that work situation, you probably also weren't extraordinarily wealthy. You had a mid-level job, you made decent money, you were functional, you could pay your bills. So do I think he was rich? No, I don't. Do I think he was he poor? No, I don't. I think he was mid-level. And I do think he had to work in one of these situations where he had access to understanding the inside of an airplane and all the mechanics. So when people find suspects I'll introduce somebody to the suspects, the most popular ones. And I'm looking at them going, yeah, no, yeah, there's just no way. Just like I couldn't have jumped on that flight and figured out how to get those stairs down. So I don't know how the hell I would have gotten out of the airplane. So yeah, he had some knowledge. He absolutely had knowledge. So that's what he was dressed in. So he jumped. So anyway, he opens gets the stairs down, and he jumps out. Now they searched the area which he landed in. They got jets, a helicopter, aircraft. They scrambled close to where they thought that he jumped. The military was called in after the hijacking. Approximately 1,000 troops searched the suspected jump zone on foot and in helicopters. The Boeing 727 was used in the hijacking was flown out over the ocean, and the stairs lowered and weights dropped in an attempt to determine when Cooper jumped. They said they felt this jolt or something, and they thought that's when he jumped. I'm not sure why that would mean anything. I don't understand that, because putting the stairs down would give you the jolt, but that he jumped with a huge airplane, I don't think that you would necessarily feel his body like leaping off. That doesn't make sense to me. And he had sent the flight attendant up to the cockpit, so nobody was watching him when he did this. I don't know when they really thought he did it. So when they thought they felt something, that's when they sort of said that's where he jumped. But he may not actually have jumped for another 5 minutes or whatever. And that could put him way farther away than they think he jumped. So where he jumped and where he landed is really questionable. And so they searched. They came up with nothing. Why did they come up with nothing? All right, let's look at the area that he supposedly jumped in. All right, if you look at the top, you see Seattle. If you look at the bottom, you see Portland. So he was said fly to Mexico City, which would go over that direction. He was probably not intending to go to Mexico City. He clearly wanted to get out of the plane quite quickly, which to me means that he either lived in that area or he lived in Canada, someplace up in the Northwest or above. He wasn't really planning to go to to Mexico. So he supposedly jumped out somewhere around the place called Ariel. And you can see, if you look at Portland, you'll see if you go up, count up two names, you'll see Ariel to the right of that river. That's their belief. And of course, Ariel has made a lot of money having a lot of DB Cooper events. Whether he jumped out there or not, we don't know. Now, all right, so here we have Ariel. You can see it more clearly now. When they said he jumped out near Vancouver, I thought they meant Canada, but no, they meant Vancouver. Is that Washington? Vancouver, Washington? Anyway, I know Portland is Oregon. I'm not quite sure where the line is for Washington State. So anyway, he jumped out there. Now, what's interesting about this, it gets a little confusing, is the flight path itself. If you look at, do you see where that river, you see the river, like you see Vancouver on that river where the little dot is, and then you see that little blue part coming off to the left of that bigger river. You see the smaller river. Well, a little bit above that is where a bunch of money was found eventually. Let me show you a little bit clearer here. It was this place called Tena Bar. You see again, Portland, you see the river like that. And it's a place called Tena Bar, also known as Tina Bar. And that's a location where a bunch of the money was found. Now, he took $200,000, but $5,000, a little over $5,000 was found 9 years later in Tena Bar. I'll read that in just a second about the story about that. So anyway, that's a lousy picture. Oh, I just want to point this picture out because you see there's a big lake there. There's a big lake to the right. There's a big lake to the left. And here's the supposed flight path, which is going down there. That's what they guess the flight path is. And I think I've got one more picture here. So if you see Tena Bar over to the green, they're saying that no, that wasn't the flight path. He was more over to the blue. So there's no way the money he had, that $5,000, would end up there. Now you say, what's this $5,000? Anyway, here's what happened. Okay, they never found this guy. They never found him. They never found the $200,000. They never found his body. They never found the parachute he used to jump with. They never found the briefcase. Nothing. Now, where could he have, when he jumped out, where would he have landed? I want to just point this out. Well, this would not be good. You jump into the middle of a forest. He could have ended up there. He could have ended up there in that lake. But in that same sort of area, you have fields. That's why they're searching these fields, because it could have landed in a field. Now, also, the other issue would be is why did he want to jump out there and not someplace else? All right, so if we go back to look at Portland, supposedly the plane was coming into Portland. Now, Ariel is where they guessed he jumped, but he could have jumped way, way, way closer to Portland. The lights of Portland, it was dark. It was rainy and it was overcast. But there would be lights coming out of Portland. Now, admittedly, if you were in the front in the cockpit, you would be seeing this much better than if you were somewhere else in the plane, which he was in the back of the plane trying to jump off of that get out of that stairs that he was lowering. But I don't know, planes bank and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times you see you'll see lights to the left, you'll see lights to the right. I don't know that he couldn't see the lights and say, I'm coming into Portland. I got a chance here. This is where I'm going to jump because I want to be near, I don't want to jump into a freaking complete forest. I don't want, really, I mean, think about this. Why would you be jumping? And where's my other picture here? I have another picture which I like. Is it this one? Yeah. Seriously, do I really want to jump into that area and then have to trek God knows how long? How about this picture? Do I really want to get stuck there? No. I mean, I don't know how much you could in that briefcase. You could have long johns under the suit. You could have something in the briefcase, I say like hat and gloves. But would you want to jump in the middle of some wild area that you have to hike out of for like 20 days? Probably not. What's the point? You got this money on you. Unless you don't give a crap and you are trying to kill yourself. You just want the thrill of doing it, and then I'm going to jump to my death, maybe. Or what it seems more like he was trying to get at least close enough to Portland to jump close to a city where, yes, he might have to walk for a day or two, but he'd be able to get to some kind of civilization where he could either get other things he needed. He could go into a store and buy something. He could break into a store and buy something. There was somebody thought somebody broke in and took like survival type stuff. Yeah, he could hitch a ride. There's all kinds of things he could do near civilization that he couldn't do in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Finding his body in absolutely middle of nowhere is not easy. So if he did jump in the middle of nowhere, you would think at some point they'd find the parachute or the briefcase. I don't know what happens if he goes into the lake, whether the parachute would stay afloat, or once he started, his body would come up eventually when it, after a few number of days, he would float to the top and the parachute would be there. I find it weird that they found zero, except for this one little bit of money. The money in a place called Tina Bar. Now here's what happened there. 9 years later, in 1980, just north of Portland on the Columbia River, a young boy named Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit in the sand at a place called Tina Bar. That is this place, Tina Bar, members only. Let me show you the area of Tina Bar. It's like that. So it's a sandy area on the side of a river. And he found this money, and then they went in and they dug up the place. And this is the money they found. He found there were 3 bundles of cash with some rubber bands that might originally been in some kind of maybe a bag, but they had rubber bands, three packs of $20 bills. There was a total of $5,800. The Cooper serial numbers matched, and the first evidence since 1971 came to light. So they were from the hijacking. The FBI searched and analyzed the beach. The river was dredged by Cooper hunters, and the theories on how the money got there supercharged the legend of D.B. Cooper. So that money, now mind you, when he was on the plane, he actually tried to give some money away to the flight attendant, say, hey, you helped me out, thank you very much. And he took some money out to give to her, and she said, no, I can't take anything. It's against rules. That may well be part of the money that fell, or some people believe was planted or hidden in this location. The flight path, as you have seen, did not go over Tina Bar. It was farther to the east. So how the hell did this stuff get in Tina Bar? There's lots of theories on that. One of the problems is that the rivers just don't go, like you think, okay, it fell and then it will go downriver and end up there. And supposedly it's the wrong direction, unless he jumped way later, which he might have done, which people don't want to recognize sometimes. But if he didn't jump when they thought he jumped, and he jumped way later and the flight path was slightly over, it may well be that could have gotten to that location by floating down over time. Where it was, meanwhile, one doesn't know. Now, there are many people who believe that he buried this money for some purpose. And I want you to profile this right now. What's the problem with that theory? Goes over your house. Did he jump in your house, Sarah? Okay, he hid it to get it later. The dude has $200,000. He hides $5,000. Why? An accomplice. There's no evidence there were ever any accomplices. And he seemed to be very much himself, doing his own thing. So, I don't think he had any helper. That makes zero sense. So again, why was the money buried? If this theory is correct, buried in that location years later. Well, that's true. He would have had to survive the jump. That's true. Is the money really? No, it is absolutely the. Okay, wait a minute. It was the absolutely the money from. It was the numbers matched. It was absolutely from the hijacking. There's no question. Red herring. Do you bury a red herring so they can be discovered 9 years later? Think about that. What's the purpose? What is it going to do for you? You know, red herrings are useful when they actually lead the police off the right track. What's the point? I want you to question this. Look at where the money was buried. What's the problem? Theoretically buried. What's the problem? The kid goes out there and he's digging around there. He's playing with his bucket and his his bucket and his little shovel. He's on the beach making a sandcastle. He comes across his money. What's the problem here? No. I don't know. He wouldn't know which notes were marked or not. That wouldn't make any sense. Somebody else found it and hid it. Why would they do that? What's the point? Water flood could destroy the paper money. You think? Water damage. On the side of the road. No, it's on the side of a river in the sand. Side of a river in the sand. If you were going to hide something you want to find it later, would you hide it in some place in the sand on the side of a river? Who does that? Nobody does that. Yeah, he had a boat. He didn't, not that we know of. Did they have a flight? None of it matters. I didn't hear well. If you had money you wanted to hide for just $5,000, first of all, if you have $200,000, you want to hide some of the money just in case everything goes to hell. You don't hide $5,000. You hide $50,000. It wasn't buried. Well, certainly not very well. And is that a good place to bury money? No. What you do is you find a road. You find you get this like Route 20 coming across Wisdom Avenue, and then you find three fence posts in. You dig there. You put. Sorry about that. That was supposed to be off. Sorry, my phone was supposed to be off. Sorry, no, I'm doing a show. Bye. Gotta talk to you later. That was supposed to be on off. That's weird. Sorry. So you're going to find a specific place that you can identify, that you can come back to later and dig it up. You're not going to go to some unidentified location, bury it so badly a kid with a bucket can find it and anybody else can find it. That makes zero sense. That's not how you bury money, and $5,000 isn't worth burying. $50,000 is. You still got $150,000, but if everything goes to hell, you can find the $50,000. So if I were him and I were alive, I would be burying it someplace useful, not someplace ridiculous. So that is a problem. It's just three things. Now the possibility of falling out when he jumped is much more likely. Now the claim is it wasn't in a place where they thought he jumped so that it wouldn't have fallen out. Now, mind you, again, I don't know the flight path is correct. You can go over to the citizensleuth.com, and there's an argument over if the flight path was even correct. If the flight path was slightly different than they thought, if he jumped later than they thought, he also could have been on the steps holding on, and it fell then, and then he jumped 5 minutes later, which would put him in a distance from that. Or he could have jumped earlier, and the money could have fallen onto the steps, and he jumped, and then the money fell off the steps later. I'm not good at trying to figure out the physics and crap. But what I'm saying is that he buried it, or anybody else buried it, is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Nobody does that. It's stupid. So no, he burying it, yes, but not there and not 5,000. You bury it someplace else that you can find it again, and that nobody else is probably going to find it. Certainly not a kid with a bucket. So it had to, in my opinion, it had to have fallen. When it fell, why it fell, where it fell, that it could have washed down, that it got stuck someplace for years, I don't know. I just don't believe anybody buried it because it makes zero sense. So, so there we go. Oh, 5,000. Okay. So if you're saying $5,000 was worth more at the time. No, two. Yeah. Okay. So the two, okay. I'll give you credit on that one, Tim. So what you're saying at the time is 200,000 was worth, I think it was worth $1 million and $1.5 million. I don't know, 20, divide that by 20. If you divide like $1 million by 20, what's that? Somebody help me out here. That would be 50,000. Okay, maybe it's 50,000. So maybe it was worth something to build. But I take it back. I think you're right, Tim. So maybe it was enough that if everything went to hell, at least he'd have something. I'd bury more. I'd bury a quarter of it. I wouldn't bury a 20th of it. I just wouldn't. I think that just seems like. But maybe if he didn't want to give up much of the money, hey, okay, Tim, I'm going to give credit on this. If he didn't want to give up too much of the money, he figured he was going to get away with most of the money, but just in case he'd leave a little bit, at least that's, like you say, $50,000 maybe in the day. Okay, Tim, I'm going to give credit on that one. I think your profiling on that is good. I take it back. That's why I like more thinking. And, I haven't really spent much time thinking about this case, so I'm doing it here, which is why I want people to understand how profiling works. When you do profiling, and you're in the point where you're analyzing things, you're not going to have everything in a row where you can absolutely say, I'm right from beginning to end. No, because you're constantly thinking, well, I overlooked that. Tim, I overlooked that. That's correct. It wasn't worth 5,000 at the time. It might have been worth 50,000. Maybe he didn't want to give up everything because he thought he'd get away with it. But if he left worth 50,000 at the time, at least it would be something in case all hell, it just all went to hell. I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with the location where it was put. I don't believe he buried it on the sand there. I just first of all, we have no idea he was in the sand there, that he was even in that area. But let's say he was. Okay, let's just go with this. Let's say the flight path was off. He landed in that area, and in a panic, he had that extra in his hand, and he decided, I'm just going to bury this crap in the sand. Could it have happened? Yeah, but I would believe only if it was done in this moment of insanity, because it's not a bright place to put anything in. It's not a bright place to bury something, because how's he ever going to find it again? It's a night. Does he know it's Tina Bar? Does he know the exact location? Even if he dug up half of the goddamn sand, would he actually find the money he buried that nobody else will find? It's a stretch, is what I'm saying. But so the real answer here is, just to say this, there's no really good answer, because we don't have enough specific evidence to prove it fell or it was buried. But there is a reason that is interesting about this, because one of the suspects, supposedly, they think is responsible for putting it in the location years later. So I'll get to the suspects in a little bit. Possible suicide. You're going with possible suicide. It's possible. I just don't know why they never found one piece of evidence with all that they had people. I know it's a big area. I just wonder why they never came up with anything except that little bit of money in the wrong place. It clearly was it was in the original rubber band. So it wasn't like it was taken apart, put together again. It was absolutely from the hijack money. And it absolutely was still intact in the way it was put together. So that is absolutely true. Yeah. So very interesting. So anyway, let's go further. Okay, so decades passed. D.B. Cooper became famous in the book, movie, and song. And it's just become this case where nobody could figure out what the heck happened. Now, I want to go to the suspects. All right. One other thing, they do a really interesting thing on this Citizen Sleuth site. is they have public debates you should know about before reading this website. And they go through the different things. Did Cooper die in the jump? Was Cooper an experienced skydiver? The Tenenbaum money, the Palmer report. Was this a real flight path? Was how did the three loose bundles of money stay together for years and get buried together? Was Cooper from the area? How did the money degrade around the edges and get holes in them? Are any of the current crop of suspects the real D.B. Cooper? And then they have this debate factor. One is 3 out of 10, one is 5 out of 10. It's very cute. So they're looking at this point being, well, this is what we argue about. I want to get to the last one, though. Are any of the current crop of suspects the real D.B. Cooper? I'm going to give you the 4 suspects that came out of the documentary. Okay, so the documentary that I watched, because it was supposed to be way better than Netflix documentary, was The Mystery of D.B. Cooper on HBO/Max, and I did have Max for another show. I paid the money for, and I just stopped it because I don't like to keep these. I have so many. I have to streaming channels. I have to get information from, that when I'm not getting information from right now, I try to knock them off so I don't pay the money every month until I need them again. Well, lucky for me, my subscription was ending on May 11th, and I got to see this one under my previous payment. So anyway, so this one had these 4 suspects. I want to introduce the 4 suspects to you. I want to start with the dumbest one first. Okay, the dumbest one is, everything again is out of order because I had to remove everything, and it doesn't come back properly. All right, so let me find this one. Where'd it go? Okay, hold on a second. Not her. I'll start with her. She's interesting. Okay, this is Barbara Dayton. Barbara Dayton was their suspect number 2, and they have 4 suspects, and why they picked the order that they picked, I'm not sure of. But Barbara Dayton is an interesting character, and the interesting character about Barbara Dayton. Let me go to. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? Okay, hold on. I want to go back to one thing that I did not do. And what that is, the FBI profile. I want to point that out so we can, when we analyze these suspects, you're going to see what the FBI would think of these people and what I would think. That does the profile match is what I want to talk about. Okay, hold on. Let me find the FBI things. Okay, suspect profiling. Okay, so the flight attendants were there. So you had they saw the guy. And that is one of the witnesses that saw him. They said he was approximately 5'10" and in his 40s, about 170 to 180 pounds, olive toned skin, brown eyes, short combed back black hair, and no discernible accent. So Bill Mitchell was as a student from the University of Oregon. He sat across from Cooper during the 3-hour flight, and he gave the FBI several interviews and provided detailed descriptions of him. So that's a lot. That's why they have this really good composite sketch. Sometimes, the composite sketches are so far off, but they had a bunch of people to be able to describe him. And then also the flight attendants also said he was around 5'9" to 5'10". They basically some people thought he might be Mexican American or Native American because he was a little skin tone was a little darker. And that's interesting to me. Because he said Mexico City, some people thought he was from Mexico, but I personally think more likely Native American of some sort or Native Canadian. So, and a little bit of indigenous stuff going up because they were in the Northwest, So there's a lot of indigenous tribes up there and also into Canada. All right. Okay, so 1973, the FBI internally released an 8-page suspect profile. They said they suggested he was a military trained parachutist. Right away, what is my issue with the FBI saying that? Because we've gone over this. They suspected he was an Air Force veteran, familiar with Seattle and the surrounding areas. What's the problem right here? That I disagree right away with the FBI. Unless he was suicidal. Correct. Fingerprints. Thank you very much. Fingerprints. Yeah. If he was suicidal, he wouldn't give a crap. That's true. So we got to keep the suicide thing in mind, although that's a lot of work to go through to commit suicide. I mean, if he wanted to just get the money, he could have done anything. I mean, I don't know. It just seems like a lot of fancy work and a lot of working to make sure everything, he wanted to make sure he could get the stairs down, to make sure he could jump. It's a lot of stuff he was trying to do that doesn't indicate to me suicide, because there's so many easier ways to commit suicide and screw people over at the same time. I mean, he could have jumped without the damn parachute, he could have just chucked the money out the window. He could have done anything. So the suicide thing bothers me because I just don't think, I think he worked too hard to plan this and get away with it to be committing suicide. And if that's true, then that he left his fingerprints there would indicate to me he did not think those fingerprints could be traced. So I'm a little concerned about that. Cooper's mannerisms. Oh yes, they said he was also very familiar with Tacoma. He noted McCord Air Force Base's proximity to Seattle-Tacoma Airport. He seemed to know things that a civilian wouldn't be aware of. But perhaps if he's in the airline industry, he would be. Don't know. Cooper's mannerisms, such as his vocabulary planning, his thorough retrieval of evidence, his use of aviation terminology, led the FBI to conclude he was not a common criminal. I agree with that. I don't think he was a criminal. I don't think he had a criminal history. I think this was his midlife crisis. 40 years old is midlife crisis time. When you commit mass murder, you commit mass murder when you're a teen or early 20s or when you're midlife. Both times are times in your life where you don't see the future. So in other words, if you're a teen who's a complete screw up, you don't see you have a good future. So what the hell? I'll go shoot up my school. You get to be 40 years old and you know you're not doing well in work. You're about to lose your job. Your workmates don't like you. You think you have no chance of moving up in the world. Maybe you're in financial difficulties. You're 40 years old and think, basically, the rest of my life's going to suck. So you commit mass murder. This is also time you commit a hijacking of this sort. All right, so not a common criminal. I agree with that. Cooper was clearly intelligent. Yes. Not impulsive or easily rattled. He was very, very calm as he did all of this. A careful and procedure-oriented planner. Yes. Adept at anticipating contingencies and adaptive strategies. Yes. When he had there were some issues that were going on. He was like, okay. He was irritated, but he dealt with it and moved ahead. Profilers also noted Cooper's ability to quickly and competently adapt to various situations as they arose, indicating he probably preferred to work independently. Maybe. And neither needed nor wanted an accomplice. I agree with that. I don't think he worked with an accomplice. Cooper's financial situation was probably desperate, according to retired FBI Chief Investigator Ralph Himmelsbach. Extortionists and other criminals who steal large amounts of money nearly always do so because they need it urgently. I don't agree with that. He's smart enough that I believe that he probably could procure work and he wasn't going to be desperate. I don't agree with that at all. I think what he said was he had a grudge. And I think the 200,000 was a grudge for whatever reason. Like, you don't respect me. I didn't get what I should have gotten. Now I'm going to screw you. I think it's more of an emotional thing. He said he wasn't a heavy drinker or an alcoholic. I agree, because he wasn't drinking much on the flight. By calculating the number of cigarettes he smoked throughout the hijacking, the FBI believed Cooper smoked about 1 pack of cigarettes a day. I disagree with that. Only because, just because he smoked cigarettes on the flight didn't mean he was a heavy smoker in regular life. Now, I know this because I've done PI work. And when I've done PI work, I've smoked a shitload of cigarettes. If I'm someplace, I'm going to hang around people, I'm smoking because I'm trying to fit in, because I'm trying to keep busy, whatever. I've done that. I'm not a smoker. If anybody saw me smoking, they would assume I was a smoker. I wasn't a smoker. But I used this, especially sometimes when I was certain places, I knew which cigarettes would be popular in the community. And I would have those cigarettes available that I could share with people and I could hang with people. That he smoked on the flight, was he trying to be cool? Or was he nervous? Or was that just a habit? I just don't know. This is where I would not jump to conclusion. He could be a heavy smoker. He could just be trying to keep busy. He could be nervous. Don't know. Trying to be cool. Have no clue. Next thing. Agents theorized Cooper's alias was based on the adventure hero Dan Cooper, a fictional Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot and the main character of a popular French language Belgian comic book series. One cover which depicted Dan Cooper skydiving. And I want to show you a picture of that. Yes. So one of the things that's interesting about this, I've always pointed out that when you have to come up with a fake name, it's very hard to do. So what you do is you either pick a name from a friend or two friends and put them together. You try to borrow stuff. Or you're standing there and you see a picture of a restaurant, and the restaurant is Bob. So you're like, I'm Bob. That's how you do it. You pick something fictional, you pick something from a movie, but you have to, when you're trying to come up with it, a lot of times you pick something that you see or know, but it's not all that clever. So it's something that's just easy for you to come up with. Here is a picture. This is Dan Cooper, Mysteries et Secrets. I don't know how you pronounce it. Mystère et Secret. I don't know. That's my bad French. I do not speak French. So here he is. He's this airline guy. He's this guy, and he's cool. You know, they think that he picked that from this Dan Cooper thing. Why? Because he's near the Canadian border. So the question is he really Canadian, or was he perhaps working overseas? Maybe in the military is what they think. They speculated the hijacker encountered that comic book thing during a European tour of duty and spoke fluent French. Okay, saying he spoke fluent French is a little bit of an exaggeration. Just because you happen to be aware of something doesn't mean you speak fluent French. Although if he's, did he see it someplace and thought it was a cool cover and that was enough for him? Did he live in Canada, some French-speaking part of Canada in which this was available there? Did he see that on the stands and think, oh, Dan Cooper, wonder what this guy is. Can't read it, but Dan Cooper's a cool name. I don't know. But he used it. Now, it doesn't mean that's actually where he got the name from. He could have used it he could have found Dan Cooper elsewhere. There's actually some interesting other possibilities, which I've looked into, but can't. Like if he was into looking at, I looked for Canadian companies that he might have been involved in, had the name Cooper, and I found some, but I haven't been able to prove anything, so I can't go there. So, but the Dan Cooper thing is interesting. Here's something else I noted, that at the time, 1971 was at the conclusion of I think it was started in 69. I know it was 69 and 70. I don't know how much further it went. But if you remember, do you remember this show? It Takes a Thief with Robert Wagner, and this is here he is. Okay, so he was a thief who then ended up working. This is Al here. He ended up working as a spy, working for the government. He was very dapper, very slick. Did he get this persona from that? He's trying to, okay, I'm going to play this guy. I'm like a spy, but I'm really a thief. So I'm going to go on the plane. I'm going to put on my glasses and see. You can't getting into the mind of somebody like this. They're going to mix things together. So sometimes things will pop out that give it meaning, and sometimes things won't pop out. So if you're looking at a suspect and they're obsessed at the time with It Takes a Thief, well, that could be interesting. If he happened to read that, I happened to be aware of this Dan Cooper comic series, that would be interesting. Doesn't prove he's the guy, but it is interesting because he had to get that Dan Cooper name from somewhere. So that is interesting. Okay, now they also said he planned the hijacking carefully, detailed, specific knowledge of aviation, the local terrain, and the 727's capabilities. He chose a seat in the last row of the rear cabin for 3 reasons. First of all, you can't get the reason you go in the back, just like police always like to sit against the wall. My daughter, who is police detective, she always sits against the wall so nobody can come from behind her, so she can surveil the room. And then I get to sit on the other side of the table and get shot. So it's really nice. Thank you, dear daughter. Anyway, but that's a common thing. So he sat in the back because therefore he can see the whole plane. Nobody can sneak up on him. It's where you want to sit. That's to minimize the possibility of being approached or attacked by somebody behind him and to make himself less conspicuous to the rest of the passengers. To ensure he would not be deliberately supplied with sabotage equipment, he demanded 4 parachutes to force the assumption he might compel one or more hostages to jump with him. His choice of a bomb instead of other weapons used by hijackers thwarted any multi-directional attempts to rush him. That's brilliant because, yeah, if you have a gun, somebody might be able to grab the gun away or whatever. They might be able to grab it away from you. But when you say you have a bomb in the case, he did have his hand up, he held like this thing like this. And that's why his flight attendant had to keep lighting his cigarettes and stuff, because he was trying to look like he was going to do that. Cooper was careful not to leave any evidence. I'm not sure that that's totally true. Before he jumped, he demanded Mucklow, that's the flight attendant, to return all notes written by him or on his behalf. So he was concerned about his handwriting. Why? Handwriting. He wasn't concerned about his fingerprints. He left his tie there. So what was he worried about? Why was he worried about his handwriting? I think that's interesting. Mucklow said she used the last match in his paper matchbook to light one of his cigarettes, and when she attempted to dispose of the empty matchbook, he demanded she return it to him. So what was in the matchbook that would give him away? Although he meticulously attempted to retrieve evidence, he left his clip-on tie on the seat. Why did he leave his clip-on tie? Was that a mistake, or did he not give a crap? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe he never thought they were going to analyze the metal on his tie. They just thought it's a cheap penny tie. Nobody gives a crap. Don't know. Okay, so he also is familiar with the 727 capabilities and confidential features, but the 727's design was a primary reason he chose the aircraft. With its aft air stair and the placement of its 3 engines, it was one of the only passenger jets from which a parachute jump could easily be made. Mucklow told the FBI Cooper appeared to be familiar with the refueling time and procedures. That's interesting. By specifying a 15-degree flap setting, he actually told them what he wanted the flaps on the airplane to be. He displayed specific knowledge of aviation tactics and its capabilities of that particular plane. Unlike most commercial jet airliners, the 727 could remain in slow, low-altitude flight without stalling. The flap setting Cooper specifically requested allowed him to control the 727's airspeed and altitude without entering the cockpit, where he could have been overpowered by 3 pilots. He had specific knowledge about flying the aircraft in general. Who the hell knows all this about a Boeing aircraft? Not just some guy who was in the military. They would, just because you're in the military and fly those planes doesn't mean you know a damn thing about Boeing aircraft. He did. So I have to believe he absolutely is connected to Boeing in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's who he was pissed off at, because he said he had that anger, and it wasn't against the airlines itself, because they were just using that particular airline. And so the aircraft, and so were many other airlines. So it had to be Boeing and not the airlines he was pissed at. And he knew too much about Boeing for me to believe he didn't work in some capacity at some point with Boeing. I also know this. Let's see what else he knew. He appeared to be familiar with parachutes, although his experience level is unknown. That's true. He understood basically about parachutes, but some of them didn't know if he was ever really in the military or as a civilian skydiver. There's some issues about that. There's a lot of argument over how much he knew about the parachutes. A cargo leader, wait a minute. They said that one guy speculated he'd been an Air Force aircraft cargo loader. Again, in the military, I just don't think so because of the fingerprint issue. Cargo loaders have basic training where emergency parachutes know how to dispatch items from planes in flight, but he wouldn't necessarily know how to survive the jump if he did it. So they're thinking maybe he didn't survive, and that's why, because he wasn't truly a parachute guy. How do you say that? A parachutist? But he knew enough to be able to jump out of the airplane. Okay, so a lot of the FBI agents didn't believe he survived the jump. They thought he lacked real great skydiving experience, lacked the proper equipment for his jump because he couldn't control the parachute that he got. The temperature and inclement weather on the night of the hijacking and the wooded terrain he might have jumped might have just done him in. And in fact, the ransom money was never used that they know of. And I'll get into that because I'll get into it now. It is entirely possible he could have used that money, but not in the United States. Back then, it wasn't computerized. So they had to ask banks to check the numbers. If he went overseas to Russia, to Europe, someplace, and exchanged money on the black market, or just bought stuff with that cash money, that stuff is going into banks way over there. How it's ever going to get back to the U.S. and be identified? And after a while, nobody gives it. Maybe he waited a couple of years before he used it. And the banks are like, yeah, we're not going to check every freaking $20 bill coming through. Are you out of your mind? So the fact that it was never identified is not necessarily overly meaningful. So anyway, they didn't think he had stuff to survive the jump again, right? Something might have been in the suitcase. I mean, in the briefcase. They do say here, they speculated the bag contained items he needed for the jump. Exactly. Goggles, gloves, that kind of stuff. Remember, nobody was watching him when he jumped. So he could have put on extra clothing, put on goggles, put on gloves, put on all this stuff. They just don't know. Okay, they don't believe he had an accomplice on the ground. I agree with that because he didn't have an exact location. He was jumping and he didn't seem to want to work with people anyway. Okay, so that's basically it on that. I agree on some of that stuff. But my main thing with this guy is, yes, I think he's smart. I think he had to have worked for Boeing at some point. His knowledge is too high. The fact he cared less about his fingerprints, to me, says he was never in the military or in prison. The fact he maybe knew about this Dan Cooper thing might have put him in Canada, which is right on the border. So he might be Canadian. The reason he might have wanted to jump out soon enough was to get back across the border into Canada, which he might have well known the whole border area, maybe the waterways and all that stuff. Get back into Canada. And the next thing interesting is, who is he? If he's gone missing forever, answer the question right there, and then I'll get to the suspects. What's the problem if he's gone missing forever? That I think is really weird. That's a good point. I guess Tim said something about that he might have rehearsed jumping in another state in a different name, perhaps. Maybe he's already jumped a lot in his life. Maybe he has, for some reason, done that. I just don't know. No family is looking for him. That's pretty weird. Boeing employee suddenly goes AWOL. That's also weird. Yes. Somebody would notice he was missing. You would think. Yes, nobody's missing this guy. So we don't have a, now the guy's, let's say the guy's a drunk, he's a criminal, he's, crossing around, running around the country doing just criminal acts. Maybe nobody misses him because nobody likes him. Nobody cares about him. But this guy apparently is smart and seems to have had employment. Nobody misses him. Does he have wife and kids? Is he single, middle-aged with no family? How many people have no family at all? Now, mind you, we're going back to the 70s, so there's no Facebook and crap. Somebody could have missed him, but they just didn't know what happened to him. But he appears to be he's not appearing to be a drifter. Drifters aren't missed. A lot of times people wonder why certain women who go missing, especially who got involved in prostitution and drugs, that they're not reported missing, the family doesn't look for them. It's because this is normal behavior for them. They go missing for 2 years. They're like, we didn't see her the last 2 years. Then we saw her for one day, and then she went. They don't look because they figure they're just out there doing whatever they're doing. But this guy looks like he's had some kind of stable life. And you don't just disappear out of a stable life with nobody noticing. So there's only two possibilities. One is that he died and nobody reported it. They didn't want the insurance, the life insurance policy. What the heck? Or two, he didn't die. Or two, he showed up again and nobody had a clue that he had committed this crime. So he showed up again, went away his family, was off on a business meeting, came back 3-4 days later, said, hey, I had a great meeting. Got my briefcase, or whatever. Goes and buys something before he returns home, a bunch of flowers for his wife, and nobody pays any damn attention. Or he's not married and doesn't have kids, but he's got a brother here or an uncle there, or maybe a dad over there. His dad's 70 something, and he goes back and visits his dad and says, hi, Dad, I was away for a weekend. And then he says, I'm going off to, I got to go do some work. I got some work over in Russia. So he takes off and nobody worries about him because it's not that unusual. So that would be some of my theories. Nobody missed him at work because maybe he wasn't working at Boeing. But you'd think if Boeing had fired him or recently got rid of him, you would think they might say, hey, I know this dude. Because it was not like he was highly disguised, so enough people had a clue about what he looked like that you would think if that guy had just been fired, that Boeing would say, hey, it's that guy. It may be that he's hiding in plain sight. It's possible. And they may say maybe he went overseas and nobody really thought about it because he was dual citizen type thing or whatever. He's Canadian, but he came from France originally, or don't know. Let me go to the suspects. All right. So I want to talk about some of the suspects because let me start with the one I think is the dumbest. Okay. Okay. Well, maybe do I want to start with the dumbest? Okay. So this woman, yeah. Okay. So she's looking very sexy in the interview. She definitely wanted to make sure her legs were shown. And this is not the best picture of her. But during the interview, she looked quite attractive, shall we say? It's quite attractive. And let me find the other picture of her. Here she is. Okay. All right. So here she is. Her name is Marla Cooper. She passed a polygraph. She thinks her uncle is D.B. Cooper. And the uncle is, hold on, let me try to find the guy. Let's say everything's out of order now. Not him. Okay, let me find the guy. So I'm so annoyed this went out of order. We got 4 people. Not him. Let me find the one it is. Okay, I've got, and not her. And you're going to wonder, what the heck, her? Isn't that a dude? Okay, how about this guy? There he is. Okay, L.D. Cooper was their suspect number 3. And oddly enough, his name is Cooper. She says that when she's 8 years old, her uncle and his brother, something like that. I got the story back. So maybe I can find it back on. I'll find it back on Wikipedia. Let me see if Wikipedia has the story about L.D. Cooper, because they do have a suspect list. I was just going to make up what I remembered, but maybe I'll get a better. Okay, let's see if he's here. Okay, Lynn Cooper, he is here. Lynn Doyle Cooper, L.D. Cooper, a leather worker and a Korean War veteran, was proposed as a suspect. He was born in 1931, and so he would have been 40 years old. A Korean War veteran was proposed as a suspect by his niece, Marla Cooper. As an 8-year-old, she recalled Cooper and another uncle planning something very mischievous involving the use of expensive walkie-talkies at her grandmother's house in Sisters, Oregon, 150 miles southeast of Portland. The next day, Flight 305 was hijacked, and though the uncles ostensibly were turkey hunting, L.D. Cooper came home wearing a bloody shirt. The result, he said, was an auto accident. Later, Marla claimed her parents came to believe that L.D. was the hijacker. She also recalled that her uncle, who died in 1999, was obsessed with the Canadian comic book hero Dan Cooper and had one of his comic books thumbtacked to his wall, though he was not a skydiver or a paratrooper or apparently spoke French. In August 2011, New York Magazine published an alternative witness sketch, reportedly based on a description by Flight 3015 eyewitness Robert Gregory. And he had some wavy hair. So he supposedly matched what Dwayne Weber looked. I'm sorry. No, that didn't match him at all. Let's go back to what he looked like. Yeah, okay. That's what he looked like. They found no fingerprints have been found. Cooper's fingerprints weren't on the plane. The fingerprints that did get off the plane, the seat, the glass, everywhere around that area, nothing matched Cooper. They also said his DNA did not match the partial DNA profile obtained from the hijacker's tie, but they weren't sure that tie DNA had anything. Somebody could have put the tie on him, They don't know where that came from. Anyway, so this guy, so an 8-year-old child remembers that he was supposed to go turkey hunting, but he probably didn't. And he had this comic book. And when did she claim this? Let's see. She claimed this in 2011 when she'd been reading every freaking thing about D.B. Cooper for years. So she passed her polygraph. Well, is that because she wanted to believe her uncle was the guy? And she wanted to show her legs off because she does have nice legs. You know, I mean, was that it? But that is silly. First of all, he had no connection to the aerospace industry at all. He wasn't a businessman of any sort. He didn't seem to have the brain. He out there hunting turkeys and stuff. I don't see anything that shows to me that he was this extremely smart businessman type. And again, he'd been in the military, so I don't see that. It makes no sense. Zero. So that one, let's chuck that dude out. All right, then I'll go to the one that's a female, theoretically. Okay, so we have, all right, so this is Barbara Dayton. And this is a picture of Barbara Dayton. She was a recreational pilot and a University of Washington librarian. She used to be Robert Dayton, who served in the U.S. Merchant Marine and then the Army during World War II. After discharge, he worked with explosive for construction work and aspired to be a professional airline career, but he didn't get his could not obtain his commercial pilot's license. Dayton had actually the first gender reassignment surgery in the country, I believe, in 1969, and changed her name to Barbara. She was believed to be the first person. She claimed to have staged a hijacking 2 years later. So what we got here? Robert in 1969 became Barbara, but 2 years later, Robert decided to be Robert again in order to, presenting as a man, to get back at the airline industry and the FAA, whose insurmountable rules and conditions have prevented her from becoming an airline pilot. She said that the ransom money was hidden in a cistern near Woodburn, Oregon. Eventually, she recanted the entire story after learning that the hijacking charges could still be brought. Also didn't match the physical description particularly closely. I don't know. Let me take a look. Not really. Doesn't look like it. So anyway, that was one of the suspects. And it's like, again, now, was in the Army, should have fingerprints. 2, didn't know anything about Boeing aircraft that I can figure anyway. Seems to have a lot of, I'm not buying it. Just that just seems kind of stupid. So we end up with 2 left that are considered the number 1 and number 2, at least by this television show. The one they say is number 2 was this guy who was one of the favorites, Richard Floyd McCoy. That's their suspect number 3. Oh, sorry, wrong guy again. Sorry. There we go. Subject number 4, Richard Floyd McCoy. Now, McCoy was interesting in the sense that this is the reason he's interesting. In 1972, nearly 5 months after Cooper's disappearance, Richard Floyd McCoy hijacked a Boeing passenger jet flying out of Denver, Colorado. Whoops, what is that? Okay, wrong picture. Okay, he hijacked. 5 months later, he hijacks. He asked for $500,000, which he got, and then he jumped and he got caught. All right, so let me read you a little bit about this guy because he's like one of the number 1 people they believe is him. Richard McCoy, he was an Army veteran. Problem arises again. Wouldn't he use gloves? Guess what? He did use gloves. He used gloves in this hijacking. If he used gloves in the second hijacking because he knew his fingerprints were on file, why wouldn't he use gloves in this hijacking 5 months earlier? So anyway, was with the Green Berets as a helicopter pilot. Then he was an avid recreational skydiver. He is staged the best of the copycat killing. So they do believe that he was copycatting, not he was the original. He brandished what was later proved to be a paperweight resembling a hand grenade and an unloaded pistol. Again, we got a guy here who's not trying to hurt anybody. So that's interesting because that's similar to his character. He demanded 4 parachutes and $500,000. After delivery of the money and parachutes at the San Francisco International Airport, he ordered the aircraft back into the sky and bailed out over Provo, Utah, leaving behind his handwritten hijacking instructions and his fingerprints on a magazine he'd been reading. Dude, you had gloves. What the heck? Okay, maybe. Then you begin to wonder, could it be him? Because he did leave his fingerprints after all, because he was a moron. All right. He was arrested on April 9th with a ransom cash in his possession, and after trial and conviction, he received a 45-year sentence. 2 years later, he escaped from the penitentiary with several accomplices by crashing a garbage truck to the main gate. Tracked down 3 months later in Virginia Beach, he was killed in a shootout with FBI agents. So here's a picture of him after he was caught. Does he look like him? Let's see. Okay, D.B. Cooper and him, they could look alike. They're close enough. But, there's so many people who look just like that. There was one part in the show where one of the guys was saying, he held up this picture and he said, my mother thought it was me. So he was like one of the, I think he was a cop, I can't remember. But, his mother thought it was him. So why do they have your picture? So many people, when you're doing a composite, look like everybody else. So do they look similar? I have face blindness. So personally, I don't know, except for those ears. I think that was one of the issues. One of the issues was his ears. Let me look at his ears. Where's the pictures of his other ears? Oh no, that wasn't the ear guy. Sorry, it's a different guy that has the big ears. So anyway, the similarities between the hijackings are certainly interesting. Here's where it comes down to. It says he's dead. Although there's no reasonable doubt that McCoy committed the Denver hijacking, the FBI does not consider him a suspect in the Cooper case because of mismatches in age and description. McCoy was 29 years old with projecting ears. Oh, he was one with ears, okay? So he was too young. He wasn't yet 30, so he didn't look like he was in his 40s or above. He had these ears that nobody said looked like him. And also, there's credible evidence he was in Las Vegas on the day of the Portland hijackings and at home in Utah the day after, having Thanksgiving dinner with his family. Now, there's people who disagree with that and say that's not true. He wasn't in those places. All right. All three of the stewardesses from the Cooper hijacking were shown photographs of McCoy and agreed that he was not the hijacker. They even were able to point to specific differences in the two men. That Cooper's nose wasn't as broad. Okay, let me find that picture again. Cooper's nose wasn't as broad. Okay, that's true. If you look on the left, it's really kind of a thin nose, and the one on the right is thicker. That Cooper had more hair than McCoy. Really? Okay, you say so. And the ticket agent didn't think it looked like him, so nobody thought it looked like him. In 2024, McCoy's two children publicly stated that the father had been D.B. Cooper after a parachute was found on the property owned by McCoy's mother. That guy claims he handed a parachute over to the FBI, and FBI have not confirmed this. So now you have, in 2024, a lot of people like to say their fathers were some horrendous person. I guess because maybe they didn't like him, and now that he's long dead, why not get something out of the whole thing? Hey, if we can prove he's that, we get on television. So you get a lot of people claiming things that just simply aren't true. So supposedly, although McCoy, interesting in that he looks, well, they say he doesn't look like him, but he committed a crime very similar to, but he never worked for Boeing. So what did he actually work for? What was he even doing? He was a warrant officer and a recreational scout. Doesn't say he had anything to do with the airline industry. So he might have been able to commit the second crime, the copycat, because he learned from the first one. But from the first one, he wouldn't have had that information to commit the first crime. So I tend not to believe it's him either. I think McCoy I think it was a copycat. I think he thought that was really cool. I could go for twice the amount of money, even more. I'll go for $500,000. Maybe I'll get away with it. He did survive the jump, but he was pretty skilled at jumping. That was one of their suspects. Now let me go to the biggest suspect. That which I don't think is the biggest suspect, but this is the one that was their number one. Okay, let me try to find it. Oh, don't I wish things were in order, but they're not. Okay, I've got to find the little pictures. I found them at one point. Not McCoy, not Cooper. Not McCoy. What the heck? Where'd my guy go? Hold on a second. I gotta find him someplace here. This must be him. There he is, Dwayne Weber. This is the guy the program really pushes the number one suspect, Dwayne Weber. Now, Dwayne, this is the crazy story ever. And I absolutely don't think it's Dwayne, just to let you know. He was a World War II Army veteran. Again, fingerprints. Served time in at least 6 prisons. Got a problem with fingerprints there? 6 prisons from 1945 to 1968. His fingerprints are like freaking everywhere. He was in there for burglary and forgery. So he's a total criminal. And the FBI and I both say, we don't think this guy was a regular criminal. We think this was a one-time thing he did. So this guy's been in the Army and in prison. His fingerprints are like, he would definitely wear some freaking gloves. and the guy didn't. He was proposed as a suspect by his widow. Let me see if I can find the picture of his widow. Sorry, again, I got the little pictures and everything's out of order. So where's widow? Man, it's hard to see any of this. Okay. Where'd you go, widow? Sorry, dang, that's so annoying. Where is she? Come on, maybe this is her. There she is, Joe Weber. Okay, this is his widow, Joe Weber. He was proposed as a suspect by his widow, Joe, based primarily on his deathbed confession. 3 days before he died in 1995, Weber told his wife, "I am Dan Cooper." Okay. Now, there's 2 possibilities. One is the guy just had this career and he just wants to, he's heard about Dan Cooper and he just wants to go out with a blast. So he says to his wife, "Hey, I'm Dan Cooper." Or he says, I'm damned in a stupor. You know what I mean? He could have said anything else. She said, "Did you say Dan Cooper?" "No, I said I was damned in a stupor." I don't know. Who knows what she heard, or who knows if she heard anything at all. But in the documentary, she's very much a big part of this documentary. So she heard Dan Cooper. The name meant nothing to her, she said, but months later, a friend told her of its significance and the hijacking. She went to her local library to research Cooper and found Max Gunther's book. This is one of the writers. And discovered notations in the margins in her husband's handwriting. Really? First of all, why is he writing in this book? I mean, and what did he write? And I can't find any information on this. So again, did she even see this? Did she even prove it? She saw this? Who knows? Like the hijacker, Weber drank bourbon. Yeah, so does my son, but he's not Dan Cooper. And chain smoked. And so did so many people in that era. Other circumstantial evidence includes, now this is where it gets interesting, a 1979 trip to Seattle. Now remember, this happened in 1971. Now we're talking 8 years, almost 9 years later. She said that they went to Seattle, and they went to Seattle and the Columbia River, where his wife remembers him throwing a trash bag just upstream of Tina Bar. So she claims that they went to this hotel. Now, remember, this is Tina Bar. That's the Tina Bar area. And she said she went to, where's the hotel? Looking for it. Oh, here it is. Okay. The Red Lion Hotel. And apparently that was just upstream of Tina Bar. So about 8 miles upstream of this Tina Bar location. She says he gets up in the middle of the morning for no reason whatsoever. Takes a bag. And it disappears. He comes back later. No, he throws it into the river. And she says, "Why are you doing that? You shouldn't throw things into the river. Because you're littering." Now, mind you, he's thrown it into the river. And now it travels down and then buries itself in the sand in just a little short period of time. And then she said she took this picture up because he was super happy. He's like, "Woohoo!" And that, now, mind you, in all the years they were together, apparently that $200,000 was never used. She would be so freaking rich, but apparently they didn't spend money like that. And then he's throwing away what would be equivalent to, let's see, $50,000 a time on a lark. He's just chucking it into the river 8 years later, because that serves some purpose. Oh, that's going to really set the police off them. It's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I swear to God. I'm like, oh my God. So, and then she's got this fellow with her, by the way. She's got this character who has called her Memory. God knows what a little scam he's got going. And he is, he's got a map out, and he's pointing out that, there's a guy in his map. There he is. So his memory guy is pointing out where he threw the thing would definitely end up at Tina Bar. So he believes for sure that her husband, Dwayne Weber, number 4 in the show. I mean, number 1 in the show is the guy. Now it says here, Weber does fit the physical description and does have the criminal background that I've always felt was associated with the case. This is Himmelsbach. I don't think he's got a criminal background, so I don't know why he's saying that. But did not believe Weber was Cooper. The FBI eliminated Weber as an active suspect because his fingerprints didn't match any of those processed on the plane, and no direct evidence could be found to implicate him. Later, his DNA also failed to match the samples recovered from Cooper's tie. So there you have the 4 main suspects, and I could go into all those other suspects you saw before. I mean, it's just to the point of ludicrousness. I mean, which one of them did it? I don't know. But what I do believe is that there are certain things that to me would say who he is. And I'll go back for your profile on him now. Now that you've seen all of this and you've seen the 4 guys they put out in the HBO documentary, who do you think DB Cooper was? What kind of profile would you apply to him? And what do you think happened to him? Isn't that Richard Gere? Well, you never know. Yeah, looking for the 50 minutes of fame. Oh my God. Yeah, between the writers and the people who claim it's their somebody related to them. Yeah, I mean, what also happens is that when you look back in time, you can always, the problem is when you're looking for things that connect, a lot of times you could find something. For example, I could have committed this crime. I dressed as a male. I have been to Seattle. I have been to Portland. I'm trying to find anything else in connection. I don't know what I did with the $200,000. I don't. I hate bourbon. I could just smoke those cigarettes because I've done that trick before. But I mean, if you look hard enough, when you talk about a huge population of people, you can find people that come up with 4 to 5 different things that kind of match. This is why when people say there's no such thing as coincidences and detectives say there's no such thing as coincidences, I 100% disagree. I have seen amazing coincidences where I'm like, there's 3 suspects and all 3 of them have these incredible links to the crime, and now all 3 of them weren't involved. It's amazing how often there are coincidences. So you have to be very careful about that kind of trying to link things together, because they may be coincidences. Especially if you have enough people, you can come up with enough coincidences. What you need to do is, one coincidence is 2 coincidences maybe. When you get up to 10 coincidences on one person, then you got something to talk about. You think the guy got away with it? Okay, Liz. All right. You say he knew his way around his Boeing for sure. Linda, I think that is one of the number 1 clues here, because this is not accidental. I mean, anybody can get on a plane and commit a hijacking, but to know what he knew about how the plane functioned, both the flying of the plane and the stairs, that was something only somebody who knew Boeing, the actual plane. He had to know that. That narrows it down to this. It really does. I'm sure he was probably injured. He could have had a first aid kit, but we don't know that he was injured. If he landed in a field, he landed in a field. I mean, if he landed in the lake, he probably drowned. If he landed in a tree, he'd be in trouble. But then you'd probably see the parachute locked into the tree. I find it interesting. I never found any evidence except that one little group of money. which is not evidence that he died. It's just evidence that he existed, that the money got there somehow. But there's actually no evidence that he's dead. They never found a skeleton or any of the other items, which to me is interesting. So he could have, if he landed closer to Portland, he could well have landed just on some grass. And so there's no requirement that he be injured. So yeah, don't know. That theory has been put out there. The whole crew planned it, but yeah, I mean that's one of those conspiracy theories that I've seen. I actually read about that one. It was so outrageous. It was like, again, too many people. That made no sense, and yeah, no. but an interesting. It was presented for sure. It's easy to rot away in the forest. That's true, except that you do wonder. I mean, it is possible. Now, I'll say this: it is possible that they just haven't run across that one spot that he's in with the parachute, the money, and the briefcase. He just went down and they just missed that one spot. We've seen that in a lot of cases where they just haven't come across. Years can go by and 10 years later they find skeleton, usually found by a dog walker or a hunter or a hiker. Those three are the ones that usually find bodies, not usually the search teams, usually those three. So maybe it's just in a spot. Maybe. And that's one of the things is we cannot know that, except we don't know why that money fell out at Tina Bar or it fell out near Tina Bar to end up at Tina Bar. That's it. I do not believe it was planted. I think that just doesn't make zero sense to me, unless I say, unless he did land on Tina Bar and and there's some kind of weird thing. He had those in hand and said, screw it, I'm just going to put this under here, but not very well in case I need to come back in an hour. I mean, but they say it wasn't there the whole time. They say it had to be someplace else because of all what was wrong with the money and stuff. They thought it actually did have to come from someplace else and wasn't there the entire time. So consequently, I personally do not believe he put it there. I believe it fell out somewhere and somehow ended up there, but I just don't know any more than that. And I cannot say if he's alive or dead. I can't. But I do find it interesting nobody has reported him missing. So that's curious to me. Let's see what else you got to think. The FBI thought he survived. They originally thought he died. Now some are saying he survived. I think that's kind of like 50-50, depending on which agent is looking at it. No Google in those days to research the plane. Lynn, a very good point. There's no way he could have known this stuff in those days, except he literally knew about that stuff. Yeah. Pat, did the authorities obtain clear fingerprints from Cooper on the plane? This is a little vague to me. Bourbon glass, seat, cigarette butts. Yes. If so, why I don't know. I think they supposedly got fingerprints from those places. They did supposedly lose some cigarette butts. They supposedly lost a lot of crap. So it's a little confusing. So I'm not absolutely sure of that, but so whether they didn't match the fingerprints on the plane that they did get and whatever else they tested, they did not match any of the suspects so far. So to me, again, that probably means he wasn't in prison, he wasn't in the military, and more important, he didn't wear gloves. So if he's so meticulous about everything else, why didn't he give a crap about the gloves? Why wouldn't he say, hey, he could walk onto the plane without the gloves, but when he got on the plane, he could have once he said, I got a bomb, he could just put gloves on his hands so he doesn't touch anything. There's things he could have done, which he didn't do. He seemed to be very, very lax about his hands. So why would he do that unless he thought they're never going to track me down? There's no way they're going to, unless they specifically catch me, then they could get my fingerprints. It's still wise to use the gloves, in my opinion. But he, for some reason, either, like some people say, he might have been just planning to commit suicide, so he didn't care. But he did so many, but then again, he took back the papers with his writing on it. Why would he do that if he's going to commit suicide? So many things that don't make sense if he's going to commit suicide. I don't think so. I think he had a reason for taking back the notes, and maybe it was because he was afraid they recognize his writing, but why would they recognize his writing as opposed to the fingerprint issue? And maybe it's because he wrote reports by hand someplace, and somebody would say, I recognize that guy's writing. Maybe they put that out, and he was afraid of that. If he left that, they put out, this is his writing. And somebody would say, I know that writing. Maybe it was very distinct. I don't know. So I don't know when he wrote that stuff. And if he wrote that stuff earlier, he should have disguised it as much as he could, or did something with, some block print thing that, nobody recognized it. But he was careful about getting that back. So it makes no sense to me that he would not wear gloves if he was worried about his fingerprints. So I can't believe he was ever a criminal or in the military. I think he might have been in the military, but maybe not the U.S. military. Could have been in the Canadian military. They could have been in the French military. He could have been in other military, but just not the U.S. military. Let me put that out there. So maybe that he did learn something about planes and flying and jumping, but not in the U.S. military. Because the FBI thought he might be French, though I didn't have an accent. Let's see. How would getting ID from fingerprints actually help them catch them? No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, if his fingerprints match some fingerprints, they know who he is. I mean, I don't understand. Yeah, I mean, if they checked his fingerprints and he was a convict in a prison, and they'd know his name. I mean, absolutely, that would catch him. I don't understand your point. Maybe getting a better photo. Well, they don't have a photo. How are they going to get a photo of a guy they don't have a photo of? I mean, nobody took a picture of him when they were in the airplane. All they had was a composite. So they went with a composite because that's what they had. Fingerprints would definitely identify him 100%. Oh, that's an interesting point. Filled out a lot of forms on the job. That may be true. Maybe that was what he was concerned about. Like, I know I might write reports. They thought he might have been management at Boeing in certain areas or something. By the way, there was a Boeing plant, and there was one in Canada. I think it was in Manitoba, Winnipeg. And interesting, the Winnipeg thing, I think, though, that it wasn't quite there the year he was there. I mean, it was like it was being built, but I don't know that it was there in time for him to have worked there before the actual hijacking. He did make an interesting comment about how he thought Minnesota was a nice country, which is right below Winnipeg. So was he Canadian in the sense that he spent time in that area, and so he had awareness of Minnesota? Because most people in the U.S. have not been to Minnesota because it's north, it's in the middle of the country and it's north. So if you're running up and down the East Coast, you're running up and down the West Coast, you're not going to go to Minnesota. So no, I have lived in Minnesota for 4 years because my sister lived there and I moved there. But mostly it was the people who really knew Minnesota were Canadians because they had that border. They cross the border a lot. A lot of Minnesotans go to Canada to fish and stuff, and vice versa. So there's an understanding between those two areas. But so that he was a Canadian that lived above Minnesota is possible, but the plant itself wasn't there at the time. So, and then there was also another plant that was built out in British Columbia, which was also near Vancouver, Canada. So he would know Seattle. And they'd been that same thing. But again, I don't think it was there in time. So that kind of screws up that whole theory. Let's see. If he was a foreigner, why worry about handwriting? Good question. Unless he worked for Boeing, and Boeing would have that in Canada or something. But again, I can't quite figure out the time Boeing was really there for him to be part of Boeing in Canada. He could have been a part of Boeing. He could have been a part of Boeing in Seattle. He could have have been a citizen of another country previously. He could have lived overseas in Europe, for example. Let's say he did live in France. When people live in different places, it doesn't necessarily mean they were born there either. He could have been, let's say he was born in Canada, and then his family moved to France, and he grew up as a teenager in France and got to see those Dan Cooper comics. And then they moved back to Canada, so he got to know Canadian area really well. Maybe they were in Winnipeg, and then he somehow ended up over in Vancouver, and then he ended up getting maybe a job in Seattle. Maybe he crossed the border and got work there. Maybe he became an American citizen at some point. Maybe his family moved and became an American citizen. But So it's really hard to say. I mean, it really is. So that would take, I mean, if I had every suspect possible, I could go through every one of their backgrounds and see whether anything matched more for what I am more comfortable with. So for me, I'm more comfortable with that he didn't feel a need to highly disguise himself except for the glasses. So I don't think he would have been easily recognized by everybody. He wasn't worried about the fingerprints. I do not believe he's in the military or in prison. He knew the Boeing way too well, and he seemed to know the Northwest, Washington, Oregon, and he seemed to know something about Canada. The Mexico thing, I don't know if that was just because he was finding a direction. The fact that he had a slightly darker, more olive tone skin could mean that, well, if he lived in Washington State, I don't know if he can get a tan up there, but he also could have some indigenous background, which gave him a little bit more color, a little bit more, melanin in his skin. I mean, there's always all kinds of weird possibilities we never think about. I mean, his family could be, he could be a mix. He could be some Norwegian could have been down in Mexico, married a Mexican woman, and then they moved north, and so he's biracial essentially, mixed heritage. Don't know. I'd like to see all the backgrounds of everybody. If he planned that hijacking that well, he must have planned his escape as well. Very good, Linda. Yes. I mean, you wouldn't think he would go, look, I know how to hijack this thing, but I have no idea how to survive once I jump out the plane. Because that seems stupid to me. If you knew things that well about the plane, maybe you would want to hijack the plane, but then not jump out of it, find another way off the plane. Like, you're going to land in this place and you're going to keep everybody away until I escape or something. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think he doesn't seem to be an idiot. So I can't believe he only figured out 50% of it, and the other 50% he just completely threw to the wind. It seems a little odd to me. Yeah. Carla says, maybe if he made his way to a coastal city and caught a boat overseas, retiring in Thailand, Malaysia, someone with less technology, a language barrier, making it harder to ID. Very possible. He could have, look, he had a frickload of money. He could have bought his way onto some kind of freighter, because like you say, he's right there on the coast. Maybe that's why he wanted to get as close to the coast as he could. Like, Portland, he could easily move out of and get onto a freighter somewhere. Maybe he had that plan, and he had a crap load of money. And so maybe he just just hit on a freighter, somehow snuck into one of those countries, had the money to live on, traded it on the black market, had a great life. Why nobody found him missing, though? Nobody seems to think that he's missing. Now, maybe he, again, as you point out, maybe he was, the guy who didn't get married. Maybe it was an only child. Maybe his mother was dead and his father was at that point was ill or something. And all he had to do was write a letter home from someplace and send it. And they think, they didn't report him missing. That's it. They just never reported him missing. So that's possible. Could have been involved in Vietnam, but again, he's not no fingerprints. That's the thing. There's the fact that he wasn't concerned about his fingerprints matching, and apparently his fingerprints didn't match anybody. So, yeah, the fingerprint thing is really the big issue for me. That and Boeing, and the fingerprints. Yeah, he's still a nobody. He had to be a somebody to have the level of intelligence he had and the knowledge he had. So again, this is not like some drifter who nobody knows because he's always been a drifter. He left home at 14 years old and he's been doing, nobody misses him and nobody wants him to return. You know what I mean? And so he's just some sleazy guy that's, breaking into people's houses and killing them or something. The guy seems to have more to him. So that nobody would miss him is a little odd, unless he planned how to make sure that they didn't miss him. Either he returned home and they never missed him because he returned home in 2 days, or he said he was going to go away for a conference. He comes back. The last thing you think when your husband says he's going away for a conference is that he's planning to hijack a plane, and he did, and now he's home again. So, if he said he was going to a conference, an engineering conference someplace, and then he comes home, and then he has dinner, and then, but the money was never found in the United States, which is interesting. But then again, people can do things like if he's a patient guy, had it all planned out. Maybe he thought, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to return home with the money. I'll stash it. And then in a couple of years, we'll move. We'll move to Thailand. We'll move someplace. And I'll say, maybe even finds a real job there. Why not? He's got skills. So maybe finds an engineering job in Thailand. And he goes off to Thailand with his family and slowly he uses the money. Because again, back in those days, they didn't check your luggage so much, but maybe it just took the money with him and ends up over there using the money on the black market. And she always says, man, it's great when you get an engineering job in Thailand because now we live in a mansion. We got a swimming pool. We got servants. It's money really goes well in Thailand. Yeah, maybe it would, but maybe it's 10 times better when you have $1 million, So it was hard to say. I don't think I do not think he had an accomplice. I do not. Yeah, because your second sentence says would have been tough to link up after the jump. Yeah. An accomplice is somebody who knows where you're going to be. You're out. The accomplice is outside the bank when you run in and come back out. The accomplice is the one who says, when you rob that house, I'll be at the end of the block. Not like when you finish jumping out of that plane, I'll be within 200 miles. Hope I find you. It makes no sense. So I don't think so. It would be easier for him just to hitch a ride or something. Let's see. Carla, he could have been a nerdy engineer type. Apologies. A loner, no social ties. Job is everything. Angry at a lack of promotion, perhaps. Sought revenge years after quitting. Moved overseas. Very, very possible. Something like that. And I wish I had I wish I knew who all those other suspects were to see if, and I want the ones that have if I put in today, maybe I'll go to Grok, AI, and go to Grok and say, hey, look, I'm trying to find DB Cooper. Here's my rules here. You can't have been in the military or prison, and he had to work for Boeing at some point, and see whether Grok comes up with anything. I think Grok will profile better than me. Absolutely think so, Linda. He had to. It's just like, oh yeah, I flew on Boeing once. I know everything. No, to have that level of knowledge. Now, my dad was what was he considered? Electrical engineer. He was a GS-18 in the government. He worked with NASA. He worked with satellites. He worked with all kinds of stuff. He knew his stuff. He still wouldn't know Boeing because, because that's not what he worked with. Now, if you said, hey, there was a guy who did something with a NASA satellite, who would know NASA satellites? I might go, oh, it's my dad. An airline mechanic. It's possible. It's possible, but he seemed to know more about airline mechanic. I think would know more about fixing the engines and stuff, but not about how the plane flies. He knew about the flaps and everything, how to get the plane, and then the stairs, which, as they pointed out, even people who flew planes didn't know you could put the stairs down when you're flying because they never ever considered doing it. That nobody considered it because you always put don't do that till you land, right? And they were, of course, worried that they couldn't even land because they had the freaking stairs sticking out, But they did land. Quite amazing. So, again, I don't think so. I don't think there's any evidence he was in the military. I just don't think so. Because now, if those were times when there weren't any fingerprints taken, unless everything I've read is wrong and a lot of people weren't fingerprinted, maybe that's true. But if everybody is fingerprinted going into the military, he would know that. And I don't think he'd take that kind of chance. So, yeah, I find that unlikely. I do. So, why couldn't they pull the stairs back up? When? Well, he was the one that put the stairs down. And there was this whole thing about the stairs. Let's see if I can find it. Because some of this stuff is very complicated. I'll put DB Cooper in the stairs. Very complicated. How stairs down. That's what I'm gonna put in here. Stairs down. Let's see. Okay, hold on a second here. Let me see if I can figure this part out. He knew that the plane could fly with the stairs open, just like a military plane like the B-24 could fly with the stairs down. How would he know that? Okay. Okay. This is somebody's theory out there. I'm trying to look for the. Okay. What do the. Hold on a second. Okay. The FBI released one of the technical reports of the Boeing company's test in 1964, with the air stairs down in flight. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, that's so complicated. I can't understand it. I need the baby version. You know what I mean? This person says, I can't understand it. Oh my God. It's all. Let me go back to Wikipedia. Maybe Wikipedia has a better, simpler explanation here for the stairs. Because it's so complicated, I can't quite understand it. So, okay, let's go back to the stairs. Okay. It's one of the very, okay, where's the stairs? Cigarette butt. Clip on nectar. Later development. Okay. Let's see. All right. Okay. After takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to lower the aft staircase. That's the back staircase. She told him and the flight crew she feared being sucked out of the aircraft. The flight crew suggested she come to the cockpit and retrieve an emergency rope with which she could tie herself to the seat. Cooper rejected the suggestion, stating he did not want her going up front or the flight crew coming back to the cabin. She continued to express her fear to him, and he asked him to cut some cord from one of the parachutes to create a safety line. He said he would lower the stairs himself, instructed her to go to the cockpit, close the partition, and not return. She asked him to take the bomb with him. So he said that he would either disarm it or take it with him. He's a very polite guy. As she walked to the cockpit and turned to close the curtain partition, she saw him standing in the aisle with a money bag around his waist. From takeoff, when Mucklow entered the cockpit, 4 or 5 minutes elapsed. Then, for the rest of the flight, she remained in the cockpit, was the last person to see Cooper. Around 8 p.m., a cockpit warning light flashed, indicating the aft staircase had been deployed. Scott, using the plane's intercom, asked Cooper if he needed assistance, but Cooper's last message was no. The crew's ears popped from the drop in air pressure from the stairs being opened. Approximately 8:13, the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitched upward, forcing the pilots to trim and return the aircraft to level flight. And that was when they were just north of the suburbs of Portland. They didn't know. This is what I find interesting, which is why I think he may have jumped way later, which is why I think the actual the money that ended up at Tina Bar may have ended up there because it was going down the river in the proper direction, because he jumped way later than they thought he jumped. With the aft cabin door open and the staircase deployed, the flight crew remained in the cockpit, unsure if Cooper was still aboard. They did not know when he jumped. So, yeah. And then Mucklow used the intercom to inform Cooper they were approaching Reno and that he needed to raise the stairs so the airplane could land safely. She repeated his request, but they never got a reply because he was already gone. And so they did land with the actual stairs out. That's amazing. So, but there's something about they could not open they could not do the stairs from the cockpit. So it wasn't something they could do from there, which would make everybody easy. Everybody could be away from the doors because nobody was going to do that anyway. I mean, who's going to open the doors mid-flight? So that was never even an issue. So, You think he pulled the stairs down before? Where? Where do you? But where? Where did he practice pulling down the stairs? Unless he worked with Boeing and was inside that aircraft or something. Yeah, I don't know. Airplane mechanic, maybe. That's what they said, but that's when the tail went like this. But that doesn't mean that has nothing. That's not proof he jumped then. I don't think that's absolute proof. I think that's one of those problems where just because there could have been any reason that things went like this. I can't see that 180-pound man jumping is necessarily going to cause. I don't know. I don't know anything about this kind of stuff. But if he's standing on those stairs and he jumps off, I don't know that he would cause any kind of movement to the plane. I find that hard to believe, although somebody knows about jumping off a staircase in the middle of in the air, let me know. But I don't see why that would cause a huge jolt, because he's just stepping off. I mean, it's not he's stepping off. I don't know how that would cause anything. But the pressures and stuff, I don't know whether they thought when they had some issue with the tail that had anything to do with him jumping, but they're also, you got a lot of people under a lot of pressure, and maybe they thought something, and who knows that's even true. So, yeah, it could have been Siegel. Yeah, could have been turbulence, slight pressure bump. I don't see that that's proof that that's when he jumped off the plane. So, they expected him to close the door behind him. Yes, I think they thought maybe if he freaked out and decided not to jump, then they could say, pull the damn air, close the damn thing, So he wasn't worried about being sucked out of the plane, because he was going to be sucked out of the plane. So he had he had the parachute on. So for him, that wasn't an issue. For the flight attendant, I'd be scared to death. Yeah, absolutely. Carla is a good question. Are there any bankers here in 1971? If marked US dollars are spent overseas, would they get a hit when deposited in an overseas bank? No, they didn't have any money tracing technology. There was no computer stuff. So no, they literally had to look at it and say, this is one of those bills on that list. And at a certain point, depending on it locally, they were looking locally. They were asking banks locally, in Washington, Oregon, if you see these show up. But if he wasn't in the local area, even let's say he was even halfway across the United States someplace, you think somebody in Kansas City was looking at every bill to see if it was on that list? Probably not. So overseas, definitely not. So I think, unless I'm wrong on that, I think it's unlikely. And how they would ever know, back in those days, maybe today, yes, but because they would go through some computerized thing. But so somewhere, maybe there is $200,000 in cash sitting somewhere. Although now it's actually worth 200,000 as opposed to $1 million. So maybe it's only worth 100,000 now. Okay, Tim says, I left out the part in the beginning. Oh, that's interesting. Where the stewardess pocketed the note without reading it. I did leave out that part because I was reading from whatever I was reading from. Yes, you're correct. This is what happened in the beginning. It's a great story. That's why you should watch the show. I mean, if you want to get the whole feel for it, please do go watch the documentary. So yes, it's true. She said, okay, let me see what it says here. Okay. Okay, wait a minute. Where's this? Okay. This is what supposedly said. The heck? Where is it? Okay. Okay, miss. Okay. So what happened is, okay, there were six in the crew. Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Schaffner, not the Mucklow lady, but Schaffner, who was sitting in the jump seat at the rear of the airplane, directly behind Cooper. Assuming the note was a lonely businessman's telephone number, she dropped the note unopened into her purse. Cooper then leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you better take a look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note, and in neat all-capital letters printed with a felt-tip pen, Cooper had written, "Miss." He's very, very polite. "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me. Schaffner returned the note to Cooper, sat down as he requested, and asked quietly to see the bomb. Wait a minute, now we got Schaffner. Now I'm getting confused. Okay. So Schaffner was the one who saw the bomb. He opened a briefcase. She saw 2 rows of four red cylinders and assumed they were dynamite. Attached to the cylinders was a wire and a cylindrical battery, which resembled a bomb. Cooper closed the briefcase and told Schaffner his demands. She wrote a note with Cooper's demands, brought it to the cockpit, and informed the flight crew of the situation. Captain Scott directed her to remain in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight and take notes of the events as they happened. He then relayed this information to Northwest Flight Operations, what he was requesting, the parachutes and all that. With Schaffner in the cockpit, flight attendant Mucklow sat next to Cooper to act as a liaison between him and the flight crew. Thanks, Schaffner. I got shafted by Schaffner. Now I got to go sit next to the nutcase. I would be a little pissed off. So then she sat next to Cooper to act as a liaison. Cooper then made additional demands that he wanted, all the things that he wanted from that point on. So yes, you're correct. So your statement was, Miss, this is important. Please read it like a scene from Ruthless People, which I don't think was around at that time. But I find what interesting to me is that he even wrote the word Miss on there. So, but of course, back in those days, all the flight attendants were women. So, so he could write Miss. But it's also very polite. He could just write, I have a bomb, and that would be enough. But he wrote very nicely, Miss, by the way, Miss, I have a bomb. So just saying. So if you would please take this to your captain. I mean, it was just extremely polite, which also is an interesting characteristic. Why did he bother? He wasn't nasty to anybody. He wasn't rude. And and then he said here about the, he said that, okay, it's a couple more interesting things. This is where Mucklow was chatting with Cooper and asked why he chose Northwest Airlines to hijack. He laughed and replied, it's not because I have a grudge against your airlines. It's just because I have a grudge. But he didn't say what the grudge was against, because I'm sure what the grudge was against would be something more illuminating. And then explained the flight simply suited his needs. He asked where she was from. She answered that she was originally from Pennsylvania, but was living in Minneapolis at the time. Cooper responded that Minnesota was a very nice country. She asked where he was from, but he became upset and refused to answer. He asked if she smoked and offered her a cigarette. She replied she had quit, but she accepted the cigarette. So, he didn't want to, he got annoyed when he was questioned about something that he knew would be, that would irritate him, because that would be something he could not answer. Or he could have lied. But oddly, it doesn't seem like he was a liar. He just left out pertinent information because that would identify him. It's just an absolutely fascinating character, and really wonder what happened to him. So he's in Argentina with Frank Morrison. Argentina does seem to keep a few people down there, by the way. They certainly do. If he sat on the money for 5 years, he could have gone to New York City, Florida, West Virginia, and lived out his life. Except that, in theory, the question is, would the banks even look at the numbers anymore? And nothing, I don't know how, I don't know how things, if the money went back into circulation later and they weren't looking for it in any specific place, would they just never know, in spite of the fact it actually was spent? Then I don't have an answer for that without doing a show, writing a book on this case and spending hundreds and hundreds of hours going through all the details. There's a huge, if I remember, I'll link the FBI website as well. So I thought the Citizens website was good because they're obviously really into it. And then I'll put the FBI website. But I think at this point it's probably not likely. Oh, well, yeah, he was a suspect too. Everybody and the brother was a suspect, let me tell you. But I just wanted really to point out the profiling aspects of this crime, things that I think eliminate an awful lot of people that people think are suspects. And I just don't think it makes sense. So I stick with that. I don't think he was in the military. I don't think he was in prison. I think he was a businessman of some sort that worked a mid-level job. He wasn't the boss, but he wasn't also at the bottom. I think he was mid-level. He was frustrated, midlife crisis. His life was, had gone wrong. He wasn't, he lost his job. He wasn't doing whatever. He didn't get the promotions. I do think chances of worked at Boeing were very high. And I think he knew the area of Northwest, and he might have known Canada. He might have been from Canada or gone, been in a number of countries along the way that he grew up in or whatever. And personally, I think, let's see, could he have died? Yes. But do I think he also might be alive and simply have returned back into society enough to not be questioned and to have eventually simply been in a place where he could then spend off the money? Yes. I would. If somebody gave me $100,000 to research a case, I would do it. So send the check. I'll do it. But if you don't send the check, I'm not doing it. So because it's too complicated and too. I mean, if nobody solved it up until now, I'm not egotistical enough to say that I obviously can solve this case, because I obviously have no clue. So I couldn't even get the show started right today. So. But I think it is really an interesting case. And I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad the fact I thought it was Mother's Day. It turned out not to be Mother's Day. So now next week is Mother's Day. What am I going to do? So I want you who are here in the chat room and your patrons, send me some cases you want me to look at. Don't involve dead mothers, okay? Because that would be just wrong. And now that I know my daughter's back in town, and maybe I'll spend some time with my kids on Mother's Day. If I go to lunch, I'll do a show later in the day. If I have no idea yet, so maybe they just they'll just give me the phone call. Hey, happy Mother's Day, Mom. But if we're going to spend any time together, I may have to do the show on Saturday or Monday. So we'll see. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Pat, and happy fake Mother's Day. Oh my God. Thank you, Liz. Thanks, Pat, for bringing us a fantastic case study on this. It is an fascinating case. It really is. It was a lot of fun to hear and think about. I was also wrong about Mother's Day. Glad I'm not alone. Oh my God. Oh, I missed my son's birthday one year too, because I was like a week. I'm like, your birthday's on what? Oh, I thought your birthday was on the 20th, not the 15th. Such a bad mother. We're very we're not exactly the most. We don't celebrate really strongly in our family. We don't do birthday parties and stuff. We don't do presents. So, it's just too much darn work. All of us hate shopping, except my daughter. She shops, but the rest of us don't shop. And so, we're kind of lax about all that. We do Thanksgiving and Christmas. And for birthdays, we either just say happy birthday, or maybe a couple of us get together and have a lunch or something. But yeah. Although this year it's my 70th birthday. And I'm trying to figure out what to do for it, because I don't want a party. I'm not a big party person. But I would like something. I mean, something for my 70th freaking birthday. So I don't know. Maybe I can get my daughter to plan something, but I don't want anything where people jump up and down and really annoying and people sing happy birthday in some shitty restaurant. I don't need any presents. No, I don't need presents, because at 70 years old, you're trying to get rid of stuff, not gain stuff. So, so I have no idea. I'll have to come up with something. Cinnamon gonna remember that. Cinnamon. It was his birthday. Yes, it was Cinnamon's birthday. In case you don't know, Grok thought my son David's name was Cinnamon, which was pretty funny. So I've been calling him Cinnamon ever since. Oh my God. So anyway, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for coming back after I don't know why the heck my mic went down. Why it was muted, and I didn't hit anything that muted it, so I had no idea. So some Mother's Day present a week early. So anyway, but thank you for coming back and being patient while I got myself back together again. And for all of you who thought, wow, you took too long to get yourself together again, there's a little button. You just go like this and you move it along, and you can skip whatever you feel bored about, I do that all the time when I'm watching somebody's stuff, because sometimes I really want to hear what they have to say, but they're in a spot and I'm like, oh, okay, now you can always do that. I can't see you do it, so you're not insulting me. So anyway, thank you for being here, and I hope to see you this Wednesday or Thursday for the hangout during the week, which also is only patrons can come to the live shows. So again, link to Patreon if you would like to be in the chat room with these wonderful people. And if you don't want to do that, again, subscribe, because all of my videos do become public once the live part is done. I don't have any hidden videos, so because I always feel like that's kind of a waste. So anyway, thank you guys for being here. See you soon. Bye.